Keeping my hood over my face, I continued staring out the bus's window to avoid making eye contact with either Lily or Ruby. But seriously, why the hell was Ruby here? Why had she chosen to join the travel club out of all the other club options? I hadn't even told her I was in the travel club or anything. As the bus sped up, entering the capital streets, I continued staring at the fleeting buildings and crowds of people who had yet to leave after the Celestial Festival had ended. Getting a headache from my eyes' overload of information, I sighed as I forcefully closed my eyes, attempting to drift off to sleep to pass the day. In front of me, I could hear the constant sound of the chair twitching as Jean and Han kept turning around to try and keep an eye on me. Somehow, these two reminded me of my parents. They were annoying, yet at the same time, deep down, I knew that they cared for me and were trying to keep me safe. How were they doing right now? Recalling my last day on Earth, I involuntarily clenched my fists while reopening my eyes for a slight second. It had been a normal day. After finishing school, rather than going straight home to study like my mom wanted me to do, I decided to head to a karaoke place with some of my classmates. Come on, Silas, you never come with us? Yeah, your parents won't care if you stop studying one time. Hurry up and... Are you coming or not? Slinging my backpack around my shoulder, I stared at my smartphone for a second, contemplating whether to ask my mother if I could go. Didn't this already happen countless times? Not even a month ago. Standing at the front door of my house, I finally gathered enough courage before unlocking the door with my house key. Hearing the door open, my mom walked from the kitchen to the front door and nodded to me, confirming my presence. Seeing her turn her back to head back to the kitchen, I clenched my fist before nervously asking, "Mom? My friends are going out after school tomorrow, can I g-dash?" Stopping mid-walk, my mom turned around to face me before replying, "Don't be stupid, Silas. Let them go, it only benefits you." What do you mean, Mom? The more they go out, the less studying they do, which means their grades are worse. That means less competition for you and more college spots. But Mom, I want to go. Silas, you'll have all the free time in the world once you finish college and get a good job. You'll be giving up your advantage by going out with them right now. That's in over 6 years, Mom. Ignoring my complaints, my mom guided me from the front door to my room before handing me another packet of work to do. You'll thank yourself for listening to me when you're older. Hearing the door slam shut as my mom headed back to the kitchen, I furiously grabbed my pencil before forcing myself to solve the problems in front of me. Why was my mom the only one who didn't let their son go out? As my furious thoughts grew, I turned away from my sheet and stared out my window, seeing countless students younger than me walking around and enjoying the winter with their friends. As the winter snow fell, I could see countless middle schoolers and younger students throwing snowballs at each other or lying down, attempting to make snow angels. Knock knock. Snapping me out of my thoughts, I heard my mom knock on my door for a second before cracking the door open. Standing in front of my door with a plate of takoyaki, my mom carefully slid the plate through the crack in the door and onto my desk. With a smile, she said, "Here's your favorite, Silas." Slowly shutting the door and leaving behind the plate, I could hear my mom's hurried footsteps back to the kitchen. Ignoring the plate, I pressed on with my problems. Snapping me back to the present, I heard the sound of a video playing from Lily's smartwatch. Ignoring the sound, I reopened my eyes and continued staring out the window. Thinking back on it, did I even like takoyaki? No. I was angry at my mom for not letting me out, so I had specifically asked for an expensive snack that took a long time to make. But no matter how difficult the task or how expensive the ingredients were, my mother still delivered the plate to me every day. Yet I left the plate of food untouched every time, purposely leaving it on my desk for my mother to see. I had thought my mother would be angry, and it would be the perfect revenge if my mother saw that the food she had worked so hard on was wasted. But I was wrong. With the same smile and content expression, she continued delivering the snack to my room daily, not even mentioning how I had left the plate untouched earlier. "Did you enjoy the snack, Silas?" Lying, I replied, "Yes." With a smile, she would just move on from the topic, inquiring about my progress with my studies. Just how many hours had she wasted in that kitchen making a snack for me, just me to not eat it? How did she feel after spending all that time making the food and cleaning the kitchen just to see it untouched? Our family was low income and middle class, yet somehow, she still had the money every day to make the takoyaki despite its expensive ingredients. The money that my father and mother worked so hard to gain was wasted on me because of a petty grudge I held. Even with a scholarship for my outstanding grades, my father still had to fork over more than a fourth of his income just for tuition, not including textbooks and study resources. A fact I had only come to realize after my entrance to this world. What kind of son was I? I was here criticizing Ren's father's parenting earlier, but was I even qualified to do that? Closing my eyes, I re-entered my flashback of my last day on Earth. Tapping my cell phone and checking the time, I approached my classmates before saying, "Yeah, you're right. It's just one time, she won't care that much."
Hey everyone, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy the audiobooks, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. If you'd like to support us further, consider becoming a Patreon member. As a member, you'll gain the ability to request the next part of a novel audiobook I've uploaded, depending on your Patreon tier.
Looking around the new area, I followed my classmates' lead out of the school and towards the karaoke shop. Ignoring my classmates' laughs and discussions, I intently looked around, taking in every part of this new experience. Upon entering the shop, one of my classmates paid for a huge room before leading us in. Watching my fellow classmates sit down, order drinks, and eagerly look for songs on the iPad like this was an everyday thing, I felt a tinge of jealousy inside me. Why had I been holed up in my room, studying this whole time, while they had been enjoying life to the fullest? Laughing alongside my classmates as I watched my friends try their best to sing, all thoughts and doubts about returning home disappeared. When I was handed the iPad, I asked my classmate beside me for a recommendation before looking at the screen with the lyrics and trying my best to sing. "Ha, Silas, why is your voice so monotone? Show some emotion, will ya? Ha." "Hey, ignore them, Silas. Your singing was much better than whatever bat screech came out of Kang's mouth." "Kai, if we're talking about singing skills, then you're at the very bot dash." Picking up a melon cream drink before me, I saved its sweet taste while watching the next person in line sing. "Hey Silas, let's do a trio." "Yeah, me, you and Kong." Putting down my melon drink, I headed to the front stage of the karaoke room where my two friends, Kong and Kai, were waiting. Busy. Feeling a vibration from my phone in my pocket, I hesitated momentarily, thinking whether I should check the message. How was I going to explain this to my mom? What was she going to say? What was my punishment going to be? "Silas, get over here." Snapping me out of my thoughts, I felt my adrenaline surge as everyone in the room glanced at me from Kang's shout. "I'll worry about it later." Following Kong up to the stage, I picked up a microphone alongside my two friends and began singing the lyrics off the screen. As I saw my classmates clapping and laughing while watching the three of us sing, all thoughts about returning home disappeared. For the next 3 hours, I stayed in the karaoke room, laughing and enjoying my free time with my friends. As people slowly started to leave to head home, I stayed, intending to savor every moment of this time. I already knew my mother would punish me when I got home, so why wouldn't I enjoy this time to the fullest now? As the sun fell and nighttime arrived, I was left in the karaoke room with my two friends, Kai and Kong. Upon seeing those two finally getting ready to leave, I decided that this had gone on long enough, so I also departed from the karaoke room. In the darkness of the night, I used my phone to navigate my way out of the unfamiliar area and back to my house. Reaching my house's front door, I hesitated momentarily at the door before deciding to accept my fate. There was no possible way for me to excuse my way out of not showing up until this late at night. Unlocking the door with my key, I creaked it open slightly, expecting to see my mother's anxious and angry figure. However, she was nowhere to be seen. After opening the door fully, I entered the house, which seemed empty, as all the hallway lights were off. Was I really going to get away with this? Heading to the kitchen next to my room, I noticed the light was on, so I peeked inside from the hallway. Seeing my dad anxiously pacing back and forth in the kitchen, I immediately thought I was caught. Realizing that the chances of me falling asleep were zero as I would be too scared of punishment, I entered the kitchen, ready to tell my dad everything. Clomp clomp. As the sound of my footsteps entered the kitchen, my dad immediately turned around and looked at me for a moment. Accepting my fate, I waited for the anger and frustration to pour out of his mouth. However, none came. Instead, a barrage of questions immediately exploded from my dad's mouth. Where were you? Where's your mother? Did she send you back here? Where is she? She is not picking up her cell, and you weren't either. Realizing I had completely shut off my cell after the first few vibrations, I took it out of my pocket and confusedly answered my dad's question. What was all this stuff about Mom? I was with my friends at a Cherokee place. I didn't see Mom at all. Where is she? Rather than being outraged at my confession of guilt, my dad simply paused momentarily before grabbing a sticky note off the counter and showing it to me. Honey, I'm sure where Silas is, he's not picking up his cell. I'm going to the school to look for him. If I'm not back by then time you're here, dinner is in the fridge. If Silas somehow arrives before me, please tell him that his takoyaki plate is in the fridge. It was 10 o'clock. Where could she be right now? As thousands of thoughts rushed through my head, only one emerged. I have to find her. It was my fault. She left. She even took the time out of her already work-filled day to prepare my snack while I was enjoying Cherokee. A snack that she knew I didn't even eat? What if she had gotten into danger while looking for me? Regret. Tons of regret instantly flooded into my head. Why couldn't I take a single second to check my phone and let her know I was with friends? She spent her entire life, day in and day out, caring for me, cooking me, taking care of me, and helping me, yet I couldn't spare a second for her. Unable to articulate the words coming out of my mouth due to my head's chaos, I spit out. To the Cherokee shop, is there? If she had gone to school, she would have found out from the teachers that I had left with my classmates for the shop, so she would have had to be there. With my father trailing slightly behind me, I rushed to the train station and took the train back to the shop. Camping the doors, I jumped off the train as soon as the doors opened and rushed toward the shop. Nearing the intersection where the shop stood, I looked around before immediately noticing my mother standing in the middle of the crosswalk while frantically looking around. All this time, she had still been searching for me, more than 5 hours straight. Realizing that my voice alone wouldn't reach her due to all the noise from others, I frantically waved my hands around, trying to catch her attention while yelling as well. It's me, I'm here. Hearing my yelling, I saw my mother pause before looking at my area and spotting my flailing hands. I sighed in relief. Did the punishment even matter anymore? As my mother made eye contact with me, stopping in place, I rushed towards her, ready to profusely apologize and thank her. However, the light next to the crosswalk turned green at that moment. Whether the driver was distracted or intoxicated, he failed to notice my mother still standing in the middle of the crosswalk as his truck surged forward. Mom, go! No matter how loud I screamed, my mother kept her eyes on me, a single tear falling from her right eye as she stared at me, completely oblivious to the oncoming truck. Not hesitating for a second, I sprinted to the start of the crosswalk, diving forward right at my mother with my arms pointed forward. None of the stares I received for yelling loudly or the people passing by mattered at that moment. They were all blurs beside the clear figure of my mom right in front of the truck. At that moment, there was only my mom and I. Feeling the palms of my extended hands touch my mother's soft jacket, all my worries faded. Still midair from the dive, I smiled as I saw my mother fall back away from the truck and onto the sidewalk. I never did apologize to her for sneaking out, did I? That's why I needed to get back to Earth. To apologize. That's all I needed and wanted to do. How I would die for a plate of takoyaki now. Tap tap, tap tap. Snapping me back to reality, I heard 2 footsteps rapidly approaching my seat. Unable to look away from the window as Ruby was sitting right behind me, I attempted to see the reflection of the windows, but the timing could not have been worse as the bus had just entered a tunnel. Well, even without turning around, I could guess who the 2's footsteps were. Kevin, where the hell are you going? It doesn't matter to you, so why are you following me? Well, I have nothing better to do on this bus, and I thought this might be entertaining. So, I'm just a pawn used for your entertainment? Well, when you put it like that? Think of it like this. You're an actor putting on a show for me? Hearing an audible snort, I realized that Kevin and Liam were now only a few seats away from Lily and I. Well, this was going to be. If I got up to pretend to use the restroom, Ruby would notice me, but if I stayed, Kevin would bug me for the rest of this trip because I sat next to Lily once. Placed in this lose-lose predicament, I ultimately decided that my well-being was more important than Lily being suspicious of Ruby and I. Unfortunately, Kevin's footsteps fastened even more at that moment, blocking off my escape route. She has to be on a bus somewhere, right? Kevin, don't ask me. As an audience member, I can't intervene in the play. What are you saying? If I were to step out into the aisle right now, Kevin would see me immediately before noticing Lily sitting beside me. Looking at Lily, who was also looking up as she heard Kevin's voice, I quietly said, "I need to use the restroom." Looking straight at Kevin and Liam, she replied, "Quite the coincidence, don't you think? As they're approaching, you suddenly need to use the restroom." "Oh, is it?" Not wasting any more time conversing, I peeked my head over the seat, making sure Liam and Kevin were looking at the seats in the other direction. Confirming that I was not in their line of sight, I stood up in my seat, with my back facing Lily, Liam, and Kevin. Looking to my right, I saw Lily staring at me confusedly, and looking towards the back of the bus, I saw Ruby in the seat behind Lily. Seeing Ruby staring down at the smartwatch and not noticing me, I did what I thought was an elegant somersault over the seat, landing face first on the window seat right next to Ruby. As the seat shook from my landing on it, I saw Ruby almost drop her smartwatch before adjusting her gaze to my back, which was pressed against the window. Quickly adjusting myself to sit normally with my back pressed against the chair, I turned to Ruby, who had just probably noticed it was me and not some random person. Pretending to be shocked, I asked, "Oh hey, when'd you join the travel club?" As her shock disappeared and a wide grin took form on her face, she chuckled before responding, "You do know you're a terrible liar, right?" Slumping down on my seat to avoid Lily's gaze, I replicated her smirk and replied, "What makes you say that? Quite the entrance you had there. Did it take you the bus ride this far to plan that? Greatness takes time." When I entered the bus, all I saw was a hooded figure next to Lily. Even looking through the gap in the seats, I saw the same hooded figure staring out the window. What can I say? The scenery outside was amazing. Resting her elbow on the armrest between us, Ruby put her head on her hand, looking straight at me before saying, "You do know, I knew it was you from the start, right? She can see desires, can't she? How did I even forget that?" From the start, she must have seen the flame of my desire in the hooded figure and noticed it was me. Putting my hood down, causing the black cat resting on my hair to fall back into my hood, I employed my sarcastic tone and responded, "Really? I didn't even know you were sitting behind me. Wow, what are the odds?" Lifting her hand off the armrest, Ruby abruptly reached towards me before grabbing my hand and bringing it closer to her. Shell-shocked by her actions, I froze, completely ignoring the voice of Kevin, who had just discovered Lily's seat. With her other hand, Ruby pinched my hand over and over again. While a normal pinch wouldn't hurt me, Ruby used her awakened strength to grab my skin. "Stop. Can't hear you. Stop, please." Pausing her relentless pinching, Ruby shook her head while saying, "Lying isn't a very good thing, Ren." She had been fine with me lying to her earlier, but now it was a problem. What the hell had changed? Usually, she just acted oblivious to my lies, but now she was inexplicably taking action and punishing me? Nodding my head up and down, I quickly replied as her hand almost resumed pinching. "Yes. I won't lie." Hearing my answer, instead of pinching me, she placed her hand on my hand, now completely surrounding my right hand as her hands were both below and above mine. "Now, answer my question like an honest person, would you?" Feeling the soft sensation of her hands, I didn't dare to lie as I honestly replied, I was pretending not to see dash. No, I already know that. Why were you sitting next to Lily when you always used to avoid her?" "What?" She sat next to me, though. Making eye contact with me for a second, Ruby nodded her head before removing her hands. "Am I allowed to ask what the hell just happened?" Completely ignoring my confusion, Ruby changed the topic by asking, So, enjoying the bus ride? I believe you said the scenery was interesting. Turning back to the window, I noticed that we were out of the tunnel as numerous trees were in front of the sun that was setting. Wait, the sun was setting? It had already been 7 hours? Just how long had I been staring out that damn window? Was the scenery really that good? Asterisk. Laughing uncontrollably as I stared out the window with a confused expression, Ruby said, why, you really weren't lying. Turning around to look at Ruby, I noticed 3 blank figures standing in aisles while staring intently at us. My screaming might have been a bit too loud. Flustered, both Ruby and I avoided their gazes before turning to the window. Quite the interesting scenery. Barely suppressing her laughter, Ruby replied. Why yeah, that tree really is just, I can't describe it in words. We're in a tunnel, there are no trees. Asterisk. Banging my head against the window to keep my laughter from leaking out, I tried to see if those 3 were still staring at us through the window's reflection, but once again, we were in a tunnel. This timing is really starting to piss me off. Well, at least I could look at the tunnel outside without getting a headache. Why can't my damn luck choose a side? Be either good or bad, not both. Raising my right hand to my eye, I activated the dragon's eye and used the slowing of time to sneak a peek behind me without being noticed. Right next to me was Ruby, covering her face with the back of Lily's chair and her hands tightly gripping the armrest. In front of Ruby was Lily, who was looking back at us through the gap in the chairs with a confused and interested expression. Next to Lily was Kevin, who was completely oblivious to the situation. His gaze remained on Lily despite all the noise we had made. Finally, he was just staring at me with a disgusted expression. Aren't I screwed if the protagonist of the book hates me? What the hell did I even do to him? I'm why he got that power-up on the cruise ship. He owes me his life. Speeding back up time, I continued staring at the window, but we were still in the tunnel. Seriously, how goddamn long is this tunnel? Regaining my composure, I braced myself as I turned around and casually took out my smartwatch, acting like the 3 main cast members weren't there. At a loss for words, the 3 of them stared at me while I was casually scrolling on my smartwatch. After a couple of moments, Liam and Kevin finally moved on as they turned to Lily. Why'd you sit all the way back here, Lily? Forced to answer Kevin's question, Lily reluctantly turned away from Ruby and I, allowing us to finally relax. I wanted to sleep, and it was quieter back here. Okay. Laughing at Kevin's sullen face, Liam's expression transformed from disgust to cheer as he said, Kevin, it's actually over for you. She does not lick dash. Cutting Liam off mid-sentence, Lily, being her kind soul, pointed at the seats across the aisle and said, You guys can sit over there. What was that, Liam? Sorry, I couldn't hear you. Pity points, you know damn we dash. Lissy, Liam, didn't you hear? Lily said she wanted some peace and quiet. As the 2 of them took their seats, Ruby finally regained her composure as she removed her head from the back of Lily's seat and turned towards me. Is that why you moved? Nodding my head at Ruby's question, I employed a sarcastic tone and replied, No, I just really wanted to sit with Lily. Receiving no answer from Ruby, I turned back to her, only to see her giving me the cold shoulder and completely ignoring me. This was supposed to be a relaxing bus ride for me, wasn't it? After what seemed like ages, the bus finally slowed to a halt, putting an end to the awkward silence. Following Ruby out of the bus, I looked around at the beautiful scenery of the wildness around me. We had entered the elven realm and left the human realm. Using my enhanced eyesight, I spotted the carriages in the distance and our travel club president beside them. As the carriages stopped in front of us, I saw students split into groups of 4 before each carriage's entrance. Of course, my trusty buddies Jean and Han walked over to a carriage with me. Seeing our group, the travel club president narrowed his eyes before joining our group of 4. As the others exited their carriage, I turned away and caught a glance at Ruby, who was emerging from her carriage with a sheepish expression. Would Lily have taken advantage of the situation with Ruby alone to question her about our relationship? Whatever the case, I doubted Ruby would reveal that she and I were part of an evil organization. After everyone had exited their respective carriages, Alya stepped away from her group and headed into the forest. A few minutes later, Alya emerged from the forest with 2 elves on her right and left, each holding a spear alongside a bow. Elves were known for their bowmanship and affinity to spirits, so as a fellow bow user, I was curious to see how the normal elves used the bow. The elf on Alya's right glanced at us briefly, showing a disgusted expression, before sharply saying, "Follow me." Even if humans and elves were technically in cooperation, our relationship was still prickly. Elves tended to look down on everyone, believing they were the superior race, so their attitude was terrible. In other words, they were just a bunch of people with superiority complexes. This was also the first time humans had entered the elven forest in over 100 years, so most elves only knew about humans from rumors. Of course, those rumors weren't saying good things about humans, as the ones creating them had superiority complexes. Walking with Han and Jean, we looked around in awe as our group entered the forest. The trees were so tall that the sunlight was mostly blocked, but that poor lighting added to the forest's mystery, making it seem almost mythical. Taking my gaze off the forest and turning to my side, I activated my system menu out of curiosity. Menu User, Ren Montclair. Class, Proficient Assassin, Level 3, 7%. Moderate Dagger Mastery, 11%. Arts, Eclipse Blade, 3/5. Rating, D+, Dream Not Yet Completed. Strength, E+. Agility, D+. Stamina, E. Magic Power, D+. Luck. Conditional. Intelligence, E. Charm, Fritz. Passive, Dragon's Will, 2/. Dragon Eyes, your eyesight is enhanced. Dragon's Transformation, you are able to harness a physical part of a dragon. Skills. Not requiring any mana usage, the skill allows the user to move 10 meters from their current location in any direction with a cooldown period of 7 seconds. The skill does not instantly move the user but temporarily increases the user's speed until they move 10 meters. Even with the duel from earlier, my dagger mastery hadn't increased a bit. My progress was plateauing. I'm going to have to enter that dream sooner or later. At this point, saying I wasn't prepared anymore wasn't an excuse. With my recent upgrade in Dragon's Will, I was more than prepared. But how could I not be scared? In my last dream, I faced off against an S-rank creature, and that was only my D-rank up dream. What the hell would I have to fight in my C-rank up a dream? A god, a demon, or a whole horde of S-rank creatures? Sighing, I looked upwards, seeing the elven guards ahead stop abruptly before turning to each other. Peering past the guards and further into the forest, I found the cause as a stack of branches blocked our path ahead. Clearly, the stack of branches was not naturally made, so it was obvious that some other elves had set it up to annoy us and halt our progress. Were we really that hated by the elves? To be honest, I wasn't even mad at the part, though. I was more mad that those elves had actually thought that a stack of branches could stop us from advancing. Did they really think we were so weak that a simple stack of logs could stop us? Sighing, I watched as Liam effortlessly cleared the stack of logs with one sword strike before turning to the elven guards. The rest of the trek to the forest's center went without a hitch, as before long, I could spot the path open up to a gigantic clearing. The 2 guards standing in front of the expression glanced at our group before reluctantly stepping aside with indifferent expressions. However, when they glanced at Alya, their expressions wholly transformed as they bowed their heads, admiration apparent on their faces. As our group of students entered the clearing, I felt like some sort of museum exhibit, as more than 100 eyes pierced through me, watching my every movement. Thankfully, that ended quickly as Alya emerged from our group and quickly captured the elves' attention. As Alya headed to the palace on the opposite side of the clearing, our group stood still, admiring the view. The clearing was about as big as the Academy's island, except there were no flashing buildings, streets, or even decorations. Everything was so simplistic, almost all of the huts and houses resembled each other, except for a couple of small differences that could only be spotted by my eyes. Instead of streets, there were paths carved out in the ground that connected the entire clearing, and there were no walls, so you could see everything in the clearing from any spot. Turning my head, I finally rested my eyes on the main attraction of the elven realm. The famed world tree. With a long and wide wooden trunk, the tree actually stretched up to the sky, its branches and leaves completely blocking the sunlight. However, that didn't mean it was dark in the clearing. In fact, it was the opposite, as the tree branches lit up gold, illuminating the entire clearing. Despite the clearing being as big as the huge island of the academy, the world tree somehow lit up the entire place, leaving no dark spots. It was actually doing a better job than the sun. Retracting my gaze from the world tree, I stared across the clearing at the elegant pure white palace that stood out amongst the simplistic houses. With a large fountain in front of it, the palace almost resembled the White House from Earth, as they were both completely white and gigantic. Seeing Alya exit the palace, I felt somewhat jealous that I would not be able to see its beautiful interior. Well, I'll get my chance later. Leading us to a row of huts, our group of students split into our carriage groups from earlier and stood in front of a hut. Entering the hut, I was surprised to notice that the hut was double the size of my dorm room despite its seemingly small outward appearance. It had 2 floors, each decorated with 2 beds and a wooden desk, and instead of a roof, there was just a circular window on top. Since there was no light in the elven realm, the roof had to be a window so the light of the world tree could shine through, illuminating the hut. Taking a bed on the 2nd floor, I laid on one of the beds, looking up and staring at the branches of the world tree through the window. Raising one of my hands, I stretched it upwards as far as possible while staring at one particular gold branch. This wasn't a tree. It was all a spirit. The entire world tree was just a powerful spirit that, despite having been alive for thousands of years, worked around the clock to keep the elven realm safe. This secret was only known by 3 people in the entire world: Lily, the current elven queen, and I. There was also another secret known by the 3 of us. The spirit was slowly dying and fading away into nothingness. Recalling the spirit's description in the book, I felt a pang of jealousy once again as I realized I wouldn't be able to meet her. How cool would it be to meet a 1,000-year-old spirit? Opening the window next to my bed, I let the cat out of my hood and carefully placed it on the windowsill before getting up. Peeking down to the 1st floor of the hut, I saw both Jean and Hans slumped down on their beds while the travel club president had already left. Leaving the hut, I walked towards the education area of the clearing in search of an archery range. Ignoring the spiteful gazes of some elves, I finally found an archery range, but I was immediately stopped before I could near the area. In front of me stood 2 elves, who seemed to be around the same age as me despite being much shorter than me. Need something? Shaking their heads, the elf on my right said, "Tisk, the food hall is over there." Really? Trying my best to keep a civil smile on my face, I replied, "Oh, don't worry, I know exactly where I'm going." Stepping out of my way, the 2 elves smirked before saying in unison, "If you say so." Confused, I stepped past them and continued towards the archery range. Why had they let me through so easily? I had expected a full-on confrontation. I mean, I had already manifested my corrupted daggers in my jacket pocket. Since there were no walls, I could see the archery range from even this distance as I saw countless elves practicing from the outside. In particular, the ones to the right side caught my eye. Their bows had a soft silver lining along the elegant white surface, and the bow's wood was perfectly carved to suit each person. Even their arrows looked like they took ages to craft, as each was painted soft white and had a golden tip. Looking at the stack of crummy practice bows to my side, I immediately manifested the corrupted bow and my maximum of 2 arrows. I could shoot the arrows, disperse them, and then re-manifest them in my hand, so the number didn't matter. Noticing all the good spots were filled, I headed to the archery range's left side, where the quality was significantly worse. The targets had holes and stains, and even worse, the bow elf's form was disgusting even to me, a beginner. As I manifested the arrows, I ensured the tips were soft enough so the targets wouldn't immediately collapse. Turning back around, I saw an open spot on the right side of the archery range as one of the elves slammed his bow on the ground before angrily walking away. Bad archery day, huh? Unnoticed by the other elves, who were so focused on aiming, I slipped into his spot before selecting the option for a 25-meter target. Knocking an arrow, I pulled back the black string before using my eyes to calculate the exact route my arrow should take. After finalizing my calculations, I released the string, allowing the arrow to fly forward so fast that unawakened people could not see it. Watching as the arrow perfectly hit the center of the target, I went back to the control panel to add a couple more targets and make them mobile rather than stationary. Firing my 2 arrows in quick succession, I watched as each one perfectly went through 2 targets by perfectly timing the point at which the targets were lined up. Unfortunately, these new targets did not survive my arrows. When my arrows made contact, the wood targets shattered into tens of pieces. Thankfully, my arrows made no noise, so I could spawn another set of targets from the control panel without being noticed. Changing the arrow's size so that it was more aerodynamic and less wide, I knocked another arrow and allowed it to gracefully glide through the air, once again hitting the dead center of the target. Unfortunately, this single shooting process took well over 30 seconds, as I had to calculate the route necessary for my arrow perfectly. But there was nothing I could do about it. Ultimately, I was an assassin, not a sniper or marksman, so there were no shortcuts to improving my bow proficiency. To decrease the time needed for an arrow shot, I just needed to practice, and practice every single day. There was also no way to check my progress in the short term, as sometimes my shooting rate would be inexplicably faster before immediately dropping to below average. My main reason for coming to the arrow range today was not to shoot my bow but to analyze how the elves around me used their bows and then incorporate their techniques. After glancing around for a minute, making sure not to keep my gaze on the same elf for too long, I found the perfect specimen. Adorned in an elegant white cloak with a visible symbol of the world tree, the elf has a crowd of people gathering around him and watching his every move, even though he hadn't even begun to shoot yet. Pretending to drink some water, I watched the elf with long white hair draping down to his waist and amber-brown eyes walk toward my section. Following the lead of the other elves, who were no longer focused on shooting and instead on the white-haired elf, I stepped back and dropped my bow. As the section was full, there was no spot for the elf to use. However, in the next moment, the elf next to me bowed before immediately giving up his spot. He didn't seem mad at giving up his spot. Rather, he looked like he was honored to have done so. Well, he was giving up his spot to the prince of the Elven Kingdom and the first successor to the kingdom, even in front of Alya. But, sadly, he would never actually ascend the throne. Well, I wasn't complaining about receiving first-row seats to the show. Actually, it wasn't just me who had dropped everything to watch the prince's performance, as the elves around me also carefully observed the prince's form. Watching him take his first shot, which took less than 3 seconds but still managed to hit the dead center of the target, I opened my mouth in awe. Even though I observed his every movement and muscle twitch with my eyes, locking it down in my memory, I could not see myself replicating it. The bow was naturally drawn to him, like it was a part of his body rather than a physical item. Like a hand, the bow appeared to be an extension of his body. Despite being a physical object, the bow seemed to be able to read the prince's mind and follow his every instruction. The prince was a marksman who had practiced for over 10 years with his specialized weapon, receiving the best training and teachers possible. Just what was his weapon proficiency? Even Alya's proficiency with this sword did not compare, and of course, my measly dagger proficiency was leagues below. That 3-second shot of his did not even use any mana or incorporate any of the techniques he had learned through progress in his bow art or weapon proficiency, yet it was already perfect. My corrupted daggers could probably stop it, though, couldn't they? Snapping me out of my thoughts, I suddenly felt countless gazes on me before a soft and bright voice emerged. "Oh, and who might you be?" Showing proper etiquette, I bowed before gesturing to the Academy's symbol on my jacket and replying, "A student of the Celestial Academy here on a visit." Scratching his chin, the prince warmly replied, "Oh, I did hear that a couple of visitors would be coming, but this soon? Well, no matter, I hope your time thus far has been pleasant in the kingdom. I'm Albiz, the first prince." Nodding my head, I was prepared for this conversation to end as the disgusted gazes of the other elves was starting to piss me off. However, The prince had other plans as he glanced at my control panel, easily spotting my pitch-black bow, which stood out amongst all the other pure white-colored bows. "Oh, did you, by any chance, come here to practice with your weapon? Why else would I be at an archery range?" As those last words escaped my mouth, I immediately felt the atmosphere around me shift as the disgusted gazes transformed into anger. I had said that out loud, hadn't I? Discreetly picking up my bow and arrow upon realizing the hostile reactions of the elves, I carefully observed Albert's reaction. Activating the usage period of the dash, I prepared for the worst-case scenario as I looked up. But there was nothing to observe. *PFFD**. You are really AR. Was it a fake laugh? Or was he laughing? However, my worries quickly faded as Albert, still laughing, dispersed the crowd and casually walked over to me, his figure devoid of the previous elegance. Was this another person? Well, let's have it. Have what? An archery competition, of course. Instantly, I heard countless elves around me break into gasps while staring at me, their eyes now wide. Well, they say losing is the best way to learn. Slinging the bow around my shoulder, I curiously asked, "What's with all of them?" "Well, you are the first living being I've ever challenged to an archery battle." Breaking into laughter upon seeing my reaction, Albert gestured to two elves, who dashed over to our control panels and set up the competition. A competition like this had taken place in the book between Liam and some elven general, so I practically knew the rules. Well, it wasn't hard to understand. You shoot as many targets as possible within 2 minutes, and the closer to the center you hit, the more points you receive. Without further talking, the competition started as countless targets, moving as fast as the luxury bus, appeared before me. Knocking my arrow, I partially calculated the arrow's route, decreasing the process to 10 seconds. However, my arrow hit near the edges of the target instead of the center as a result. Shooting 3 more times, I glanced at the scoreboard, my expression immediately stiffening immediately. Home, 110. Visitor 12. But the score wasn't the reason for my expression change. In front of the scoreboard stood Albert, who was casually sipping a cup of tea while staring at me, his bow nowhere in sight. There were still 30 seconds left in the competition. After gaining a mere 10 more points in the last 30 seconds of the competition, I glanced at Albert's bow, which was lying a few meters away from me, and the corrupted bow in my hands. Why the hell couldn't my bow do that? Of course, I knew it was a skill difference, but blaming myself wouldn't do anything, so I needed to blame something else. Well, even if I couldn't copy Albert's technique, this trip wasn't completely useless as I now know what a real bow looks like. Engraving the image of Albert's bow, I dismissed the bow in my hands before remanifesting it to mimic Albert's bow completely, except for the color. Clap and. Hearing the thundering applause and sneers, I considered putting my new elegant bow to use. Getting angry at losing now wouldn't do anything. Anyway, my primary weapon was a dagger, so who cares about the bow? Not me, that's for sure. Raising his hand to silence the crowd, Albert approached me with a smirk, not a condescending one, but a genuine one. With his pure white cloak and long blonde hair rustling in the breeze of the wind, Albert picked his bow off the ground before turning to me. "It was a good match. Are you Fuyahem at W as indeed?" Walking up next to me, Albert placed his hand on my shoulder and pat me on the back before returning to his original position. Either not noticing or pretending not to notice my foul and confused temper, Albert continued in his joyful tone. "So, how was your academy's trip through the forest and into the kingdom?" Dismissing the bow from out of Albert's sight, I slung my backpack around my back before replying. "Nothing out of the ordinary, just a simple walk through the woods to get here." Rubbing his chin with his hand, Albert seemed to think briefly before asking again. "Nothing abnormal? Itchem? Is something abnormal happening inside the forest that I don't know about?" Recalling the incident where some stacks of wood had blocked our path, I stayed quiet, simply shaking my head at Albert's question. It was not because I had lost miserably to him. I didn't want to add unnecessary variables to the event by divulging this information. If it were that important, Albus would ask the other students, like Liam, and receive his answer. As the crowd again encircled Albus once again, congratulating him on his win against me, I slipped out amongst the noise. Albert could be quite a useful resource in the future, just like Liam had Alya, but at the same time, the relationship was to be built slowly, didn't it? Tap tap. However, as I walked farther and farther away from the training range, I heard the sound of rapid footsteps approaching me. Turning around, surprising Albert, who was rushing towards me, I asked, "What is it now?" Seeing that Albert wasn't the type of person to be offended if I didn't use a civil tone and no other elves were around, I dropped the act from earlier and spoke to him normally. Taking a second to regain his composure, Albert brushed back his hair, revealing his amber eyes, and replied, "Did you have any plans after this?" "None in particular." Beaming with brightness, Albert nodded his head up and down before responding. "How would you like to visit the royal palace? Being able to scout out the palace in advance would be nice, but what exactly was this prince planning? Challenging me to duel could be seen as him merely trying to test my skills, but inviting me to the royal palace was entirely different. In the book, even Alya had to convince the current elven queen to allow the main cast into the palace when we had first arrived. Once again, patting me on the back, Albert did not wait for my response as he said, "No need for any thanks. I felt that the bow competition might have gone too far, so this is my way of making it up to you." "Gone too far? Aren't you the one who scored 110 points in the first 30 seconds and then drank tea for the other 1 minute and 30 seconds? Considering I had nothing better to do and knowing the layout of the Elven Royal Palace would be nice for my plans, I nodded and followed Albert. Fortunately, Albert seemed to know a secret route to the palace, as the two of us were able to find it without being noticed. Stepping before me, Albert knocked on the huge metal gate before it promptly opened without any identification measures. Did that work for everyone? As the gates opened, the fount sitting right before the entrance to the house entered my view. Taller than the hut I was staying in, the fountain was unnatural. Water flew out at incredible speed, and despite all the water pressure, no water leaked out. A fountain can be a magical artifact? Taking a moment to look inside the fountain, I was surprised to see countless leaves from the world tree inside. Seeing my confusion, Albert smiled before replying, "For the royal family, it's a sign of good luck and prosperity if the leaves of the world tree enter the fountain. Well, I was here, so their good luck had worked." Following Albert's gaze, I looked directly above the fountain and saw a large branch of a world tree covering the royal palace. As we went deeper into the palace courtyard, I was also surprised to see that there were close to no guards. Rather, only a couple of chiefs and servants were running about. Well, in the Elf Kingdom, revolts and tension were uncommon, if not non-existent, so they didn't have to worry about security. But, recently, there must have been some tension rising about the elves due to our presence in the clearing. Though, as we can see from the Academy's terrible security systems, guards don't do anything to protect, so I understood their lack of security. Finally, the two of us crossed through the massive courtyard as two massive double doors stood before us. Raising his hand, Albert's hand shone a light green before he touched his glowing hand to the door, causing it to open immediately. That was what it looked like to anyone else in the world, but I could see a completely different story with my eyes. For a split second, I saw a light green spirit in the shape of a ball appear in Albert's hand before it merged with his hand, causing it to turn light green. Could I ever get one of those? Pretending I didn't see the spirit, I entered the palace immediately and noticed the countless glass chandeliers hanging above my head. One earthquake and all of this would be gone. Stopping in front of me, Albert turned around and curiously asked, "Well, what do you think?" Extravagant but not in a bad way. You know, saying it just looks nice also works, right? Now you're just putting words in my mouth. Am I? Your expression says otherwise. Erasing my expression of awe, I walked past Albert, examining the painting in front of me, and replied, "What? Are you going to challenge me to another bow duel? For your sake I won't." As Albert led me around the massive palace, occasionally stopping to explain parts of the elven history, I used the time to examine as much of the palace as I could, specifically looking for the secret entrances. But there was none. Was my only way in here with a spirit like Albert? Looking out one of the windows on the top floor of the palace with Albert by my side, I felt somewhat weird, as the light had remained safe throughout the entire day. Even though it was almost 9 p.m., it was still as bright as it was in the afternoon. Is there no control remote for that thing? Flustered, Albert stepped back before asking. By that saying that thing, are you referring to the world tree? Yeah, you would think with all the elven history you've been telling me about, they would be able to figure out how to do some proper lighting. Not wanting to further this topic of conversation, Albert returned to the window and responded. I'll keep that in mind when I succeed to the throne. How does he say stuff like that without a single bit of sarcasm? After a couple more moments, Albert and I headed down the stairs as it was finally time for my departure. At this point, I had already extended my stay in the palace for over 3 hours, and any time Albert tried to hint at my leaving, I simply acted oblivious, asking him more questions about history. When the tree elves first left the forest and encountered the ice elves, there was a slight conflict. Speaking of leaving, do you be dash? Interesting. Tell me more about these so-called ice elves. Having surveyed most of the mansion, I had the blueprint of it in my head, so I was content with leaving. Also, I learned quite a bit about Albus. Despite being terrifyingly strong, he was somewhat of a pushover. I was sure he would forcefully kick me out after the second out, yet he still let me stay for another. Leaving the palace and heading out of the gates, I dropped by the hut for a quick meal. As I entered the hut, I realized both Jean and Han were nowhere to be seen while the travel club president was eating at the table. I'll eat later. As I reopened the door and headed out, I used my eyesight to quickly scan the entire hearing before catching a glimpse of the two walking around with one of the elven local specialties in their hand. The specialty large resembled ice cream from my word. However, the main difference was that you could bite right into it as the surface was made to be warm. Could an awakened even receive a brain freeze? Wasting no more standing around, I decided to head out of the clearing to scout to see if they had arrived yet. The world tree doesn't just randomly corrupt after being fined for over 1,000 years. There has to be a cause for it. That cause is the dark elves. Like humans, elves can also become jinns, but the number of dark elves is much lower than that of jinns. It's almost impossible for them to meet a demon, as they're always stuck in this forest. But when there's a will, there's a way. As a result, only elves with the most hate and desire could transform into dark elves. Using their dark mana, they slowly began to corrupt the world tree, hoping to wipe out the entire elven population. And while their plan worked perfectly for now, they would soon realize something very important. The world tree, or in this case the world tree's spirit, cannot be ended from the outside world. To completely corruption the tree and take control of it, they must directly enter the tree and corrupt it from the inside. That's why the Elven Queen has yet to take action on these dark elves. So far, they do not pose a significant threat. But she was soon to be proven very wrong. Considering the importance of this mission, the demons had personally sent their own, a B rank at that, to help the C rank dark elves. Unlike humans and other species who simply die, when a demon meets its demise, all the jinns contracted with it instantly die, all the demon's blood-related family dies, and finally, the demon itself meets its end. Simply put, sending a demon out of the dark lands right now was a huge risk, but they had decided to do it anyway. Well, with Lily on their side, the queen should know about the demon and not underestimate the power of the dark elves. But that was exactly what I wanted. There were two goals that I needed to be accomplished. The world tree needed to be saved, and the spirit needed to be replaced. While the first part would likely happen naturally with Lily and the main cast's help, our paths diverged in the second part. Looking at the guards, who were standing outside the only entrance to the clearing, I let out a sigh. There was only one problem. I was genuinely in the wrong here. In the book, the world tree's spirit hadn't been replaced and stayed the same, yet here I was trying to change that. Had I become my greatest nightmare, Lily? Well, technically I was purposely changing the plot, but it was for good reason. Later in this story, Alya and the main cast are forced to return to the Elven Kingdom as the spirit of the world tree is fading away. The corruption sent by the Dark Elves and his already long lifespan had already put it on death's door. But with the addition of the incoming wars and more demons leaving the Darklands, the spirit simply couldn't hold on any longer. So, they replaced her. The world tree is essential for the elves as all their magic and power stems from it, so losing it would be incomprehensible. But then, who would want to volunteer to become the spirit of the world tree? Well, I've already met him, Albert. Thus, that entire arc was spent with the main cast finding a way to replace the spirit with Albert before it dies. Of course, with Lily over there, they did not need for that long journey as she already knew the method. So, then, what's my job? I need to convince Lily that something changed, and now the world tree is already more corrupt and on death's bed. She'll see that and immediately speed up the events by replacing the world tree early. Why was I trying to change the book's events when my motto was to follow the plot? First, this change wouldn't significantly impact the plot, which centers around the human realm. As long as the elves retain their power, what happens in their realm won't have any significant impact. Sure, it would introduce some variables, but I was ready to accept that. But the more important reason is that it's my only option. During their attempts to replace the world tree spirit with Albert, the Dark Elves would take advantage of this by launching countless attacks. That was just a distraction, though. On the same day, for the first time in 10 years, the demons would make a public move as they would attack not the elven realm but the human one. As you can expect, the sudden attack caught the entire realm off guard, and with Liam, the story's protagonist, not here, it only got worse. Only after 2 days were the demons able to be stopped with the help of 2 top 100 heroes from the High Dominion. When Liam and the cast returned from the realm, completely oblivious to the events, they could only describe what they saw as a wasteland. Confusion and shock immediately enveloped them as they stared out the carriage window at the area of the demons' attack. A wasteland. Burned villages, trampled vegetation, no life to be seen in a 100-meter radius, and finally, the dead body of someone I knew very well. What was his use in the story? Just like me, another character fated to die just to help the protagonist's personality advance. The village the demons attacked was the one that Han's family had control of. Liam's reaction to seeing a fellow academy student dead was to train even harder and become even stronger before the eventual counterattack. That was something that didn't require Han's death at all, though. Finally, my third reason was power. I knew I had to do something after seeing Albert's performance versus mine in that bout deal. Especially since I plan to complete my dream advancement to C rank soon, I need all the power I can get right now. You can never be too careful. I had learned that lesson too many times now. All I wanted was a fruit from the world tree, which was very obtainable considering my goal destination. Waiting in the bushes about 5 meters from the guards, I waited for the perfect moment when both of them were turned away before dashing ahead and out of sight. Now, once again surrounded by the tower trees, I moved the corruption inside my body to combine with my mana in the center. Manifesting 1 black and red wing attached to my right shoulder, I ignored the pain and flapped it 3 times. Instead of moving forward in any direction, I moved upwards, along the trunk of one of the trees. Sitting on a high branch of one of the trees, I kept my wing before using my eyes to scan the part of the forest I was in. Nothing. Flapping my wing again, I appeared on an elevated branch of another tree before scanning with my eyes. Taking advantage of my limited time with the wing, I did the same actions until finally, there was something. Although I couldn't see anyone or anything with the density of the trees, my eyes caught a faint sign. A misplaced leaf was sitting on the forest floor. Bingo. Sitting atop the elevated branch, I didn't immediately rush in, but I first seized my wing as I was running too low on time. With my wing gone, I manifested my 2 corrupted daggers alongside a mask to cover my face. Twisting my head, I tried to work around the tree's density by specifically peering through their gaps, but there were no more signs. Besides that 1 misplaced leaf, there was nothing. Yet, that was a good sign for me. Dark elves are pretty stealthy and sneaky, aren't they? Jumping off the tree, I stabbed my daggers into the trunk's bark to break my fall, the tree's leaves turning gray shortly after due to my corruption. Using the shadows cast by the towering trees and the tree's branches partially covering the sun's rays, I silently made my way toward the area. Climbing up a tree next to the misplaced leaf, I peered again through the forest, finding even more signs of a disturbance. While no footprints were left behind, I could see parts of the ground barely less elevated than others, indicating that pressure had recently been placed on that area. Jumping from branch to branch, I followed the path of the uneven area until the signs finally became clearer. Now clear footsteps were left in the ground, and the leaves were scattered about, indicating they no longer cared about hiding their presence. What had changed? Were they in a rush now? The attack on the World Tree was tomorrow, so what were they doing now? Speeding up, I manifested a blood-red and night-black wing on my right shoulder before raising my right hand. Tapping my hand, I flapped my wing 5 times in succession, using my eyes and the slow-down time to perfectly calculate the best route despite going faster than visible to a human eye. Releasing no noise, I appeared on one branch, perfectly avoiding another tree's trunk, before appearing on another branch over 10 feet away. I went so fast that speed mirages were being left behind on the previous branches. I went at maximum speed until finally, after 8 seconds, I felt my mana starting to run low due to the dragon's eye. On the other hand, the orb in my right shoulder, which was attached to my wing, seemed to be able to hold up for another 15 seconds. But that was because I combined the red substance with corruption instead of mana, so I wasn't using any mana but rather my corruption. This would mean that after 15 seconds I could still use my wings, but I would begin losing corruption for every second it manifested. As for the difference between using mana or corruption with the red substance, that was something I had yet to figure out. The only visible one was that my wing changed to blood red and ocean blue or blood red and night black, depending on what I used. Feeling my perception of time slow back to normal, I almost crashed into a tree after flapping my wing a final time, as even my eyes couldn't keep up with the speed of these wings. Turning back around to spot more signs of unusual activity, I realized that in these seconds, I had sped through over half the gigantic forest of the Elven territory. Yet, despite that long distance, the footsteps and scattered leaves remained. Why were they traveling this far? Seeing the trail of footsteps halt, with only a couple of trees in front of me, I stood still, perched on an elevated branch, and used my eyes to scan everything like a hawk waiting for its prey. Unfortunately, there was no prey in sight. Thump thump. Hearing the sudden sound of pressure on the ground, I pushed back my black mask, adorned with the same blood symbol I had used during the cruise ship and Colosseum incident, before immediately turning around. But there was nothing there. Using my eyes, I scanned the area below me for the source of the sound, but to my surprise, there was nothing. Nonetheless, sounds like that doesn't just magically appear and disappear. Every effect has a cause. After taking out my corrupted daggers, I equipped my cloak and prepared to use the shadow cage in case anything happened. With my hands enveloped with corruption and my mana a second away from colliding with the blood-red substance, I waited for any signs. Pure silence. Like a leaf in the wind, the sound had come before immediately vanishing. The trees rustled in the breeze of the soft wind, the sun's rays peeked through small holes in the forest to illuminate small spots, the occasional chirping of birds as they flew by, and the sound of squirrels gnawing at the wood. Something was wrong. Unable to put my mind onto whatever made me uneasy, I stood still, hunched over and perched on the tree branch with my daggers in hand, aware of any sudden attack. No, the sound. If whoever made that sound was trying to kill me, they wouldn't have made that sound in the first place. Why would they make the noise, then? They had to have known I was here. If they had the hiding skills to evade my eyesight, they could see through my guise easily. It couldn't be some passerby dark elf, could it? If it was a single dark elf, I could take them, but if they were multiple? Using my cloak to blend in with the darkness, I slipped down the tree trunk, hiding in its shadow. In front of me stood one of the small areas illuminated by the sun's rays, the grass being dyed orange instead of dark green. Leaning with my back against the tree, I studied the small circle of light in front of me and the footsteps that ended right inside it. Earlier, I thought there were multiple footsteps due to the countless lower elevation areas, but now there was just one set? There were multiple footsteps earlier. I was sure of it with my eyes. The path also had no diversions. This was the only way it led. Rather than being happy upon realizing there was only one set of footsteps, my suspicions grew. The other footsteps had been created by that one person as well. Then, Why would he want to create false footsteps to indicate more people and that noise? A trap? If they were trying to catch my attention, it had worked perfectly. Rustle, rustle. Hearing the leaves around me rustle for a split moment, I immediately looked upward, keeping the mask on tightly, and spotted a figure. Levitating in the air right above the center of the illuminated spot, the figure of a tall man with a top hat and horns peeking out of it was visible. With the sun sitting right behind him, he looked as if he were some protagonist or chosen one, as the rays perfectly complemented his floating figure. Tilting his top hat downwards, the djinn gracefully began slowly descending down from his spot before asking, "Oh, did I keep you waiting for too long? You must have been quite fast to get here before I even realized someone took the bait." Ignoring his question, I locked my gaze on the upper part of his top hat. The symbol that Astrid showed me and the teacher held was sitting comfortably on the top hat, the sun's ray illuminating it perfectly. A trap? The thought had never occurred to me. How could I, a self-proclaimed variable, be trapped if my existence in this scenario was never planned? How could someone set a trap for someone they didn't know would be here? Traps had to be meticulously planned, well thought out and personalized, so setting a trap for someone like me, whom you had no information about, would be impossible. Yet, it had worked perfectly at this moment, directly refuting my words. I was so focused on setting a trap for and hunting the dark elves that I hadn't even realized I had walked right into another trap. As the figure descended into the forest, I got a better look at him, realizing his eyes were yellow, the key indicators of demons. He wasn't a djinn, he was a full-fledged demon. Was this one of the demons planning to raid the world tree? Snapping out of my confusion, I didn't wait for his complete descension as I slashed my daggers in the air, releasing an elemental slash barreling right at him. Since the figure was a demon, the odds of a mere D-rank elemental even touching him were 0, but the main goal wasn't to hurt him. It was to understand him, his tactics, way of dodging, way of attack, and personality. Would he be mad that I had attacked him before he landed? Staring at the elemental slash of night black, the figure snapped his figure, causing an Easter bunny to jump out of his hat. Staring at the bunny made of the fire manifested on his hat, I almost applauded as the flame bunny jumped right in front of the elemental slash, causing an elemental reaction between fire and dark. As a result, a sudden amount of smoke enveloped the illuminated clearing before clearing a moment later, leaving the demon now standing on the solid floor. "Bit feisty, aren't you?" He was amused at my attack. Trying to get more information before the battle started, I asked. "Says the one who led me into a trap." Shrugging his shoulders, he pointed to the familiar symbol on his hat before saying, "Orders from the top." "You are not, though, this isn't my style." "They are the opposite. Magician acts should be done in front of an audience where people can applaud, cheer, and eventually cry at your actions." Talkative and a show-off? Seeing that he was still adjusting his suit and top hat without attempting an attack, I inquired further. "Cry? Aren't magic acts supposed to be entertaining, not sad?" Tying his tie around his neck, the demon responded, "A play without drama and tragedy cannot be considered a play. Unfortunately, in this case, you are the tragedy. TSK such a tragedy, there won't even be an audience here to witness this world-class play. Are you even a magician? That's a drama, not a magic act. I'm an actor, not specifically a magician, my dear little tragedy." Realizing that all the information spewing out of his mouth was useless, I readied my daggers, awaiting his attack. Even though he was the demon, I still held the advantage through various cheat abilities. I would only reveal these secrets and give up my advantage if I knew using them would guarantee my victory. Staring at me with a wide smile, the demon touched his hands to his cheeks before looking downwards. The demon slowly rose from the ground until he levitated about 2 feet above it. Not skipping a beat, the demon took off his top hat, causing 3 doves made of the air element to fly out. Swinging my 2 daggers, I replied with 3 of my elemental slashes before stepping back. I knew that mere elemental slashes couldn't come close to stopping those covers, but the slashes were enough to trigger an elemental reaction. What happens when dark and air collide? Pollution and smoke in a forest. The perfect indication to the main cast and elves, who should already be on watch due to Lily's warnings about tomorrow. As smoke covered the clearing, blocking the sunlight and the demon's sight, I swiftly dismissed the 3 doves using my corrupted daggers and the new third movement I had obtained by upgrading my dagger proficiency. The cataclysmic burst. The movements channel a devastating amount of magic energy together to create a powerful explosion that takes care of everything around it. However, as it uses magic energy or mana, the explosion cannot damage physical objects but only magic spells or shields. Watching the doves disappear from the explosions, I activated the dash's usage period before peering through the smoke and spotting the demon, who was still levitating in the same spot. Jumping out of the smoke, I plunged my dagger into his levitating body. However, he was ready. Manifesting a pure red umbrella in his hands, he threw it forward, expanding it to full size, which completely blocked my dagger strike. Activating my dash, I appeared 10 meters backward and into the smoke, already beginning to disperse. An umbrella user? Haven't heard of those, have I? As the smoke finally disappeared, the demon dropped to the floor, the umbrella over his head, blocking the sun, and said, "Such a tragedy that there won't be an audience. I'll have to recreate this act when I get back to the theater, so don't mind me if you say me taking notes. Demons go to the theater? Who in the right mind would watch a demon perform?" Seeing a moment to regain some mana, I stalled for time by further questioning. "And who exactly is your audience eager to witness your plays?" Shaking his head, the demon pointed into the forest while shaking his head and said, "Unfortunately, they're busy with the World Tree. I don't know if you've heard of it. If you ask me, it's not all that. I mean, it's just a tree. My plays are much more interesting, yet everyone is obsessed with that damn tree." The attack had changed days from tomorrow to today. If this had happened over an hour ago, I would have thought Lily and company had already been prepared for an attack, even if it had happened a day early. But now it had changed. The appearance of this demon and, most confusing, the appearance of the unknown organization. If there were only 3 demons in the book's battle, I was sure there would be at least 10 in the battle now. They had reinforcements. Enough reinforcements where they could spare a demon just to make some stupid trap and capture a single person. Snapping back to reality, I turned around to see the demon laughing hysterically in the middle of the illuminated area. So even you're more interested in that damned tree than my act when it's right in front of you? I'll have to teach you a lesson, won't I? Reaching into his pocket, the demon clenched his fist before reopening it, revealing countless cards between his fingers. Throwing the cards right at me like a shuriken, the demon turned away briefly, manifesting more cards and sending them right at me. Standing completely still, I looked forward, dismissing my 2 daggers and summoning my corrupted bow. At the same time, I had already begun to calculate the perfect route my 2 arrows would need to take to hit intercept every card. Knocking one of my 2 arrows, I sent it flying straight at the 5 cards nearest me, as they were all lined up perfectly. Not skipping a beat, I knocked another arrow and aimed towards the right. Released the soft and elastic string from my hands, I watched the second arrow hit the first 2 cards before bouncing off one of the trees at the edge of the illuminated spot and hitting the other 3 perfectly. Scanning the area, I frantically looked around for the demon, but he was nowhere to be seen, once again avoiding me despite my enhanced eyesight. If they could spare a demon to deal with outliers like me, there must be tons of demons attacking the World Tree right now. Could Lily, the main cast, and the Elven Queen defend all of them? Or would they have underestimated the number of demons due to Lily's book knowledge and not been prepared, leading to their loss in the fight? In any case, I had to get back to the clearing as soon as possible. Instantly turning around to the source of the noise, I saw the demon perched on one of the trees like me earlier with an umbrella facing towards me, blocking his lower body. Knocking one of my arrows, I aimed at the demon and released the arrow, barreling right at him. Activating the dash's usage period, I prepared for his attempt to dodge by aiming my other arrow at his right side. But he simply stood still. Keeping the arrow still knocked in my bow, I watched the demon stand unfazed in front of my streaking arrow. Holding my breath, I watched the arrow get nearer and nearer to the demon unit, and finally, it was right in front of him. The arrow passed right through his body like he was a hologram before lodging itself in the tree behind him. A hologram? Under the pressure of my arrow, the tree's trunk instantly cracked, slanting to the right and on the verge of completely collapsing. Ignoring the tree, I gazed around the clearing before instantly finding the demon again, and another demon and another one. 3 demons were perched on a branch of a different tree, watching me as if I were a museum exhibit. Attempting to discern the identity of the real demon, I looked up at the one nearest to me and asked, "Aren't you the one supposed to be putting on the play? It seems like I'm the one doing all the work here." However, in response, they all opened their mouths at the same time, perfectly timing their voices in unison. "I need to set the exposition, don't I? Don't worry, you won't be ready for rising action." Freytag's pyramid? How did he know about that? Was that really a thing in this world too? The pyramid describes the events that take place in a piece of literature, the exposition, which is the background and setting, and the rising actions, which are the time used to build up to the climax. He knew about all that, yet he got it wrong. Genuinely curious about whether he knew about the full Freytag pyramid, I corrected him. "I think you mean the inciting incident. Also, the pyramid is used for works of literature, not plays and dramas." Standing still, I watched the 3 figures open their mouths for a second, trying to dispute my claim before immediately closing them. How do you know that? Was the Freytag pyramid some rare concept in this world or something? That would explain why I didn't know about its existence while a demon of some powerful organizations did. Because I do. Is there a problem? Staring at me with a dazed expression for a second, the 3 figures simultaneously shook their heads before stammering around. "And no, let's just continue this, all right? Are all demons this civil? He's making sure I'm ready before he continues the fight? Was this an intermission or whatever it's called?" "Yeah, I'm ready." As I nodded my head, the 3 figures instantly sprung into action. Each one of them took off their top hat, and their open umbrella began shining an elegant gold hue. After examining the 3, I decided that winning quickly was more important than keeping my abilities a secret. Even if they were winning, what if I returned to the world tree, and all the power-ups were gone? All of this would be for nothing. Conserving my mana for the fight, I combined the blood-red substance with my corruption, manifesting a mixed wing on my right shoulder. At the same time, each umbrella lost its gold hue as a beam appeared from the middle of each umbrella, steadily heading towards me. Staring at the 3 beams, one to my right, one to my left, and one right at me, I carefully decided my next actions. Since 2 of the figures using the gold beam were holograms, wouldn't their attacks also be holograms? So, 2 out of 3 of these attacks would do nothing to me, wouldn't that be true? If I wanted to, I could flap my wings several times to maneuver around all 3 beams to dodge them. But that just put me on the defensive again, as he could prepare another attack while I was dodging. Raising my head, I slowed, allowing myself more time to think as the gold beams slowed, still approaching me but at less than half their original pace. Recalling the initial time I had hit the holographic figure, I compared that scenario in my head to the one in front of me, using my eyes to examine all the abnormalities. After a moment, a smile, unconscious, appeared on my face. "I think I got it." Well, even if I didn't, I still had a 66% chance of choosing the holographic ones. I had been quite unlucky recently, hadn't I? I guess some good luck has to balance it out now. The sun. Looking at the sun's rays, which overlapped with the 3 gold beams heading right at me, I saw something weird. The refraction created as the sun's rays passed through the gold beams was inconsistent throughout all of the beams. One handled it normally, while the other had unusual patterns as they interacted with the sunlight, creating an interesting visual effect. However, upon closer inspection, the inconsistent beams had different visual effects at the point where the sun's rays intersected them. Weren't they supposed to be the same? How were the holograms different? Looking at the 2 suspicious beams heading right at me and to my left, I decided to ignore them for now. Even if the holograms were somehow different from each other, it didn't change the fact that they were still holograms. I had confirmed earlier that the figures, aside from the demon, were holograms when I saw my arrow pass through one of them. As I raised my hand to speed up the backup time, I suddenly felt the area around me increase in temperature. Normally, a change like this would be unnoticeable to me, but it was to the point where I almost sweat from just standing still. Allowing my mana to drain further, I scan my surroundings, instantly finding the source. Behind me, another beam, clearly not holographic, made of pure fire barreling right at me. There were 2 demons, not one. The holograms were different because each one was of a different demon. How could I not have noticed the 2 demons then? There was only one way. He must have just arrived. Recalling my conversations with the original demon earlier, I realized something. It was quite clear I was stalling, who would stop in the middle of a battle to ask some questions, but why had he gone along with it? Was he stalling as well? How many demons are here if they can spare 2 whole ones just to deal with some random exploring the forest like me? If they keep those 2 demons here instead of using them on the World Tree attack, their confidence in the attack succeeding must also be high. Reining back in my thoughts, I realized the situation was dire. I needed to get out of her as fast as possible. Deciding to take on the second devil who had just arrived, I sped back up time and ran through one of the holographic beams, avoiding both the real ones and using a dash to appear in front of the source of the fire beam. Taking one-on-one battles would be my best chance at winning this battle, so I needed to take care of one of them. But as I appeared at my destination, there was nothing there. The start of the beam seemed to float above the ground, somehow still going further and further into the forest. A magical artifact, shaped like a button and shining bright red, was sitting on the ground below it. Hearing the grass rustling behind me, I immediately manifested my 2 daggers, spreading my mana and corruption around me and creating a small mana cage that only surrounded me before inputting the corruption. This shadow cage blended in perfectly with my black clothes, and due to its small size, it could not be seen by anyone besides me. A true playwright is always prepared for any actor's mistakes. It appears a mistake was made when you did not die just then. Looking down at the button on the floor with my wing ready to flap at the sudden movement, I replied to the voice behind me. What about the holograms? Humans tend to believe the first answer they see without considering other options. The human brain is such a repetitive and boring thing. Out of mana from using Dragon's Eye for so long earlier, I saw the bright red button on the ground slowly sink, immediately causing me to flap my wings. But as I moved forward at an insane speed, I realized that a mana cage completely encapsulated the area around the button, trapping me inside. Looking at the mana cage with my eyes, I immediately noticed that its composition was completely different from the teacher's. It used demon attributes, shown by the blood red dots spread among the blue cage. Corrupting that cage would be impossible for me. Outside the mana cage stood the demon, staring at me with a wide grin while weighing a similar button in his hand. I would be quite the bad playwright if I didn't explain the scene to the audience, wouldn't I? Desperate for any sort of information, I nodded my head. From the start, I had backup plans upon backup plans set up. After all, this was my personalized trap. This cage around you was just one of them. This button in my hand will set off an explosion that can even kill a B-rank hero. Holding my 2 corrupted daggers, I walked toward the edge of the cage, my small shadow cage moving with me. The shadow cage was so perfectly sized that it was less than an inch from my clothes and head, surrounded by only me. So what if I couldn't corrupt and take over it? Looking at my walking figure, the demon curiously observed me before asking, "Shouldn't an actor narrate their actions? That wing is quite interesting." Shaking my head, I kept my expression indifferent as I replied, "This isn't a first-person narrative, is it? You do know I'm the scriptwriter. I have control over what it is. Is he still going along with this plaything act? It's getting a bit weird now." After activating the dash's usage period and getting my wing ready to flap, I walked right to the edge of the cage and continued forward. Stepping through the barriers of the mana cage like it was nothing, I activated dash while simultaneously flapping my wings. The demon, who hadn't even registered that I just casually stepped through his cage, stood still with his mouth open. My daggers, already in the perfect spot, stabbed right into the demon's vital spots as I appeared before him. Not just 2 daggers, though. Using all of my corruption, I manifested over 7 daggers, each immediately appearing in the air before stabbing right into every part of the demon's body. Losing all control over his muscles, the demon stared at me, petrified, blood leaking out of his mouth as he attempted to talk. Seeing his body slump to the floor, I dismissed the shadow cage that perfectly surrounded my body and my daggers. Giving him one last stare as I headed in the direction of the world tree, I replied, "I'm going to pick up my payment. An actor never goes unpaid, right?" Walking back to the elven clearing, I used the rare moment of peace to catch my breath and recover. Although it hadn't seemed like it as I casually walked through his mana cage, it had taken a lot of corruption and energy as I had to strengthen the barriers of the shadow cage to the max. Guess I'm back to one arrow. Seeing the familiar path leading to the world tree, I quickened to a jog while occasionally scanning my surroundings for any more outlying demons. Fortunately, there were none around, so after a couple more minutes of jogging, the entrance to the clearing was in sight. No guards were at the entrance, and it was eerily quiet despite the clearing housing thousands of elves. Unable to peer through the entrance walls, I went through the entrance and immediately used my eyes to scan the entire clearing, but nothing was there. Looking through the windows of some huts, I could spot some frantic-looking elves shuffling about and staying quiet the best they could, but there was no one outside the huts. Looking inside one of the windows, I made eye contact with one of the children before he immediately stepped back and hurried out of sight with a terrified expression. "Right? I'm still wearing a mask, that's why, isn't it?" No demons. No Lily, no main cast members, and no elven fighters were visible. All that stood in front of me were the abandoned streets and areas of the elven realm. In the entire clearing, which was as big as the capital city of the human realm, it was just me who stood outside in the empty streets. Complete silence enveloped the city, and besides the lack of people outside, nothing was out of the ordinary. There were no damaged buildings, no signs of any fights, and finally, no dead bodies. My one fight with the demon from earlier did a shit ton more damage than this. Sighing as I realized that my rush was for nothing and I had put myself in danger for no reason, I strolled towards the trunk of the looming figure of the world tree, which stood in the center of the clearing. Peeking inside the shops and food stands scattered around the clearing, I was surprised to see that all the goods were still there despite the lack of people. "Don't mind if I do." Grabbing the elves' local specialty snack, which resembled a snow cone from my world, I continued, slowing my pace every time I took a bite of the snow cone. The cold, refreshing ice mixed with the sweet and tangy syrup made the treat so delicious that I even stopped for a second to relish its flavor. With a simple cover made of tree bark, the ice from the snow cone piled up on my head as I held the bottom of the cover at chest level. As my tongue turned a dark blue from the syrup, I felt the hot temperature's effects wash away, leaving some coldness in its place instead. Seeing the massive and wide trunk of the world tree come closer, I took a step back, figuratively and not physically, to reanalyze the situation. The elves of the realm must have been in a rush as they left all their products and goods in the open. The only question was then, what were they rushing to get away from? Looking around the empty, silent clearing, I couldn't see any concerns or latent dangers waiting. However, I didn't doubt that a battle was taking place right now. Lily, the elven army, and the main cast members were all gone, so some fight or event had to occur. The elven queen must have also alerted all these elven citizens to hide in their houses. They wouldn't just run there and hide without specific orders. Or maybe the main cast and the queen were all coincidentally out on vacation at the same time? So now, I can enjoy life and forget about saving the world tree. Yeah, in my dreams, what would these stupid characters do with me? Reaching the base of the world tree, I once again scanned my environment, this time finding an abnormality. Visible to only my eyes, I could see the roots of the world tree shaking and rumbling every so slightly, as if people were fighting and attacking inside it. Confirming my theory, I placed my hand on one of the roots, marking its exact spot and coordinating with my eyes. A second later, when I re-examined my hand's location, I sighed as I looked down and saw that my hand had indeed changed locations due to the vibrations of the roots. The Elven Queen and main cast must have allowed the demons to infiltrate the world tree to prevent the outside clearing from being destroyed. Then, inside the world tree right now, They must defend the spirit inside the tree from the attackers. All my questions were answered now, yet I still had a problem. Staring at the root in front of me, which shook violently for a second before returning to normal, I placed my hand on it before removing it and placing it again and again. How exactly do I get inside this damn tree? Recalling how Albert, the elven prince, had previously used the spirits to unlock the elf mansion, I had somewhat of an idea. But where exactly was I going to get a spirit from? Hey bro, I need to borrow your spirit. Why? To save the world, you actually need to trust me, dude. Next time you're trying to steal or kidnap something, think of a better excuse, man. This is just sad. Feeling a sudden pressure exertion on my shoulder, I immediately snapped out of my thoughts and tilted my head. The black cat stood on my right shoulder, licking its paws, once again oblivious to the events happening right now. Staring up, I could see the branch of the world tree that the cat had jumped off as it had left some scratch marks. That's at least 25 meters. Looking at the black cat, who was now licking its fur, and at the world tree, a sudden thought came to my mind. Don't animals count as spirits? Both have a conscience despite not being humans, and they both have wills and desires. Feeling the roots tremble even more, I stared at the cat on my right shoulder for a second. You must forgive me, whatever existence you are. After internally and externally to the cat sitting on my shoulder, I slowly lifted it up, carefully holding it in my hands. Lowering the cat in my hands, I walked closer to the world tree's trunk before carefully grabbing one of its paws and touching it to the trunk. Nothing. Absolutely nothing changed or happened. Turning back around, I attempted to back away, but even when I mustered half my strength, I couldn't move. Looking down at the cat, I found the reason. Its claws were embedded in the trunk, and it held on for some reason, like there was no tomorrow. That trunkswood was supposed to be harder than metal. Just what the hell is this cat? Letting go of the cat, I stepped back and watched the cat swinging its feet around with its claws attached to the tree like it was nothing. Ignoring the odd scenery of my cat, I recalled that Albert had hit the palace door with power combined with the spirit. Well, in this case, I assume I'll have to attack the tree simultaneously with my cat, as it's pretty much the same thing as both of us will still be attacking the world tree. Wasn't my cat technically already attacking the tree by clawing at it? Standing beside my floating cat, I manifested my 2 corrupted daggers before reaching back like I was throwing a spear and hurling my dagger at the tree's trunk. In the case I angered the world tree's spirit by attacking it, I did not want to be right next to it. While dispersing my 2 daggers and ensuring my mask was on correctly, a sudden bright light enveloped me, forcing me to close my eyes. After a few seconds, I attempted to open them again, only to close them out of the pain immediately as the bright light was still there. This battle was a gamble on Lily's part. She had essentially gone all in. If she won, there would be no civilian deaths or damage to the village outside, but if she lost, the entire village would collapse, and the world tree would be gone. Finally opening my eyes again, I immediately scanned my surroundings, realizing I was surrounded by bark. In front of me stood the only way out. A path that seemed to lead me closer and closer to the center of the tree, where the spirit was held. Looking down, I saw my cat lying on the floor with its tummy upwards, so I swiftly scooped it up and placed it into my hood. Fastening to a jogging pace, I followed the path, occasionally feeling the tree rumble due to an attack. The closer and closer I got to these rumblings, the more I regretted my decision. This tree was my counter. The entire thing was surrounded by impenetrable walls, so even with my eyes, I could only see the area around me, like I was a normal person. The only good thing about this tree's inside was the lack of light, so it would be relatively easy to sneak around unnoticed even if I wanted to. Of course, the problem was that this space was so narrow that just one person blocked the entire path, so how was I supposed to sneak past people? As the split continued to diverge and split, I would quickly find the one leading the center of the tree by using my eyes to peer as far as I could into both paths and finding which one was directed towards the center. This strategy wasn't foolproof as it was possible that a path could loop around before heading to the center, but it was either testing or checking for 3 hours. As I silently walked through the path, a sudden rumble enveloped the tree, but this time, a sound came with it. the spirit of the world tree. The demons were already there. Immediately sprinting down the path, still silent but now leaving footsteps as my feet touched the ground, I manifested my 2 daggers. Had Lily and the main cast lost the fight already? Peering down the path once again, I found myself proven wrong. Ahead of me on the path, I saw Lily, Albert, and the main cast, similar to me, sprinting towards the tree's center. The demons had somehow gotten to the center before they did, and the Elven Queen is occupied with a fight, so she can't help now. Combining my corruption with the blood-red substance, I rapidly created a wing and flapped it several times, immediately closing the distance between Lily and I. Then, I stopped for a second and repositioned myself before using the wing to appear right below the roof and then dashing forward over the heads of the main cast members. Dismissing my wing to save energy, I continued my mad sprint to the center of the tree, and after a few more moments, I finally arrived. The path opened into a small cave, where a clearing was the size of a hut. More importantly, 2 demons were sitting down crisscross on the floor. Behind the 2 demons were the roots of the world tree, which were shining a malevolent red. I had 2 goals to accomplish. Ensure Lily and the main cast win the fight and corrupt the tree to the point Albert is forced to replace it. Of course, one goal was more important than the other, but that didn't mean I wouldn't try to complete both. Thankfully, the clearing had no walls or barriers, so my eyes were of some use. Walking to the entrance, I was about to sneak in and find a place to hide when a sudden force propelled me backward, almost causing me to fall. Picking myself off the floor, I realized a mana cage was blocking the entrance. However, this mana cage was somehow invisible? Unfortunately for the demons inside, they had used regular mana to create it instead of demonic infused, so I simply placed my daggers to the invisible barriers. Though I couldn't see the progress, I felt myself gaining more and more power over the barrier until I finally had complete control without the demons inside even knowing. Changing the barrier settings, I didn't completely dismiss as it could be useful but instead altered the properties so that anyone could just walk in. Still retaining control over the barriers, I could enter the clearing without being noticed, as the 2 demons were so confident in their barriers that they were staring at the spirit. Suspended in the air and floating in the middle was a foggy figure that even I couldn't discern with my eyes. However, it was better than nothing, as all the demons could see with their normal eyes was just a bunch of fog gathered up that stretched from the floor to the roof. But just looking at it, I could feel the presence of a mystical entity. Just like how an A rank gave up an imposing aura, this mystical entity emitted the same thing, but it wasn't damaging. One could struggle even to move or stand up under the pressure of an A rank's aura, but with this entity's aura, which was indisputably stronger than an A rank, you had no physical effects. In fact, it was quite calming. I felt a sense of serenity wrap around my brain, removing all the stress and worries clashing in my head. With the Elven Queen fighting the majority of the demons someplace else, only 2 demons were stationed here, despite it being the most important point in the entire tree. With Albert's insane bow skills, I was confident that the main cast could defeat these 2 demons quickly. Below the foggy figure floating in the air were the 2 demons, one holding a cube-shaped device. Thud. As the sound of the main cast and Albert's rapid footsteps finally made it into the clearing, the demons still showed no signs of life as they remained below the fog. One of the demons held a cube-shaped device with a small hole on the top, emitting black smoke that flew upwards toward the fog. As the black smoke slowly mixed with the cloud of fog in the middle of the room, my vision of the figure inside became less clear, and the pure white fog began to turn light gray. They were corrupting not the physical world tree but the spirit and manifestation of the world tree. Staring at the corrupted daggers in my hand, I wondered why they had only brought one cube-shaped device to corrupt the cube. If they had brought about 100, the world tree would have been gone by now. Looking away from the figure inside the partially gray fog, I focused on the device in the demon's hand, perfectly capturing all its outward details. Searching around the clearing, I finally found a vantage point to stand on before discreetly climbing onto a rough rock protruding from the walls. Using the higher vantage point, I peered into the cube's inner portion using the hole on the top that was emitting the black smoke. Using my eyes to memorize the exact details of the cube-shaped device, I stored the information in my head before shifting my gaze to the clearing's entrance. Thump thump. As the main cast and Albert walked through the mana cage, which was now under my control, I stepped back into the shadows, dismissed my daggers, and manifested the same device the demons were holding. Using the last of my corruption, I created a lid covering the top so the black smoke wouldn't leak out. Since the device had so many intricate details and was so complicated, I had to use every single bit of my corruption to replicate it, so it worked perfectly. Unfortunately, that left me with no weapons or corruption for my wings. All I had was my mana in my chest, the blood-red substance flowing in my body, and my cat sitting in my hood. Reaching into my jacket pocket, I felt the cold and fragile glass of the countless potions lined up, each filled with a dark blue substance. All my preparation was really just finding a shit ton of mana potions. What would Raven say when he saw our expenses for this month when I get back? All his hard work and time spent distributing scrolls, putting up advertisements, and hiring and interviewing people were used in a single day. Would he believe me if I said I was saving the world? He wouldn't, but Zung probably would. Letting out a final sigh as I imagined Raven trying to hand in his resignation papers, I made sure I was out of sight before watching Albert enter the clearing. At the same time, the demons continued staring at the device on the ground with their backs turned away, still having complete faith in their mana cage. Wasn't I just the best person? I had set up the perfect sneak attack for them. At this point, shouldn't I basically be a main cast member? I sure as hell have done more for them than Zach. What does that guy even do besides provide emotional support? Wait, aren't I the entire main cast and protagonist at this point? I'm the one saving the world, not Liam. Me, Raven, Zing, and the cat in my hoodie. We were the new and improved main cast. A savior from another world, a money-hungry kid from the black market, a villain who became a good guy, and finally, a random-ass cat that could be a god with time travel magic. We even sounded like a real main cast from a magic book, didn't we? There was only one thing missing. None of us had good intentions. My goal was to leave this world and return to mine, and the rest of the members just wanted money or were animals who just wanted food. Unlike the pure-hearted Liam, the naive Lily, the humble Alya, and the good-natured Zach, who just wanted to save people and better the world with their actions. We were just a bunch of anti-heroes out for fame and glory, weren't we? Well, who cares about the journey there? It's only the end goal that matters. Our groups were both saving the world, but my group was doing a lot better. For now, that main cast spot was ours. Scrapping those thoughts out of my head, I began unscrewing some of the mana potions in preparation while watching Albert knock his first arrow. An hour ago. Inside the White Palace, more specifically, the ballroom, the Liana, also known as the Elven Queen, sat at the front of the dining table. Beside her, on a smaller and less extravagant chair, sat Albert, who was staring at the cold food on the plate in front of him. On the other side of the table sat Lily, Alya, Liam, and Kevin, but besides the primary members of the main cast, there were also two other guests. Ruby, who Alya had invited due to her saving them during the dormitory attack, and Irene, who had been coerced into coming by Lily, were awkwardly sitting side by side, staring at the countless utensils in front of them. Breaking the awkward silence, Liana stood up from her chair, which very much resembled a throne, with its countless gemstones and size, and turned to her son, Albert. Now that everyone's here. As Albert's face turned a rose red, and he inwardly cursed the damned person who had stayed for over 3 hours, the Queen continued. Everyone here should have already been informed about the situation tomorrow. However, that is not to say that the details are certain. For now, all we confirm is that an attack will occur on our realm. The details, time, and location are all variables for right now, so do not blindly trust what you have heard earlier. Seeing the humans nod their heads, Liana delved into the defense and military side of things. He issued them special badges and explained the positions in which their defense forces would be located. For 10 years, she had not even spoken to a human, but here she was now, trusting them with most of their military secrets. Glancing at her daughter, Alya, mid-explanation, Liana recalled how her daughter had pleaded with her to at least listen to her fellow humans' words. Unable to resist her daughter, Liana agreed and heeded their words, learning about the inevitable attack on their city. Obviously, Liana did not fully trust the humans' words despite Alya's constant vouching, as she knew of humanity's terrible nature, but in the end, she decided it was better to be safe than sorry. If the attack happened, they would be prepared and ready to fight with strategies already set up. But if it were the opposite, it would just result in a lot of wasted time and resources. It was a simple choice: either be prepared for and save countless lives during a battle or lose some resources that they could regain later. However, Liana had specifically left out the existence of the inside of the world tree alongside the world spirit. Such information was too much to give to anyone. Not even her daughter knew about those existences, as she had only disclosed it to Albert, her successor and the future ruler of the Elven realm. Finishing up her explanation of the strategies, Liana sat down before continuing to dig into the food below them, prompting everyone else to follow suit. Within a few moments, the silence was already gone as Liam and Kevin were already arguing about which of them would be able to kill a demon first. On the other hand, Alya bombarded Lily with questions, trying to gather as many details as she could about the future attack. It was her hometown with all her family, so seeing the usually calm Alya stressed and nervous wasn't surprising to the others. Though, Alya didn't dare pry too far. Within the main cast group, there was an unwritten rule already established. Do not ask Lily where she receives this information. All four of them were among the smartest in the entire school, so they were able to see through Lily's flimsy excuses when she attempted to persuade them to help her. Despite all that, they still decided to believe in Lily due to their friendship, and it ended up being true. Time after time, every time Lily came to them with information about the future, the scenario would always occur, albeit with some changes. At this point, it was normal for the group when Lily came to them asking for help, and all of them were happy to agree. Thus, an unbreakable bond of trust and camaraderie was born within their group. From their perspective, it was easy to see Lily was hesitant and nervous about giving up her source of information, so the rest of the group created that unwritten rule to make her feel more comfortable. At this point, the four of them were inseparable, despite how it may have seemed to outsiders who only saw the constant arguments. Thus, Ruby and Irene were awkwardly left to eat their food in silence. Of course, having invited Irene, Lily tried her best to drag her into the conversation. Still, with Alya's constant, understandable questioning and Liam and Kevin's arguments, such a thing was impossible. Tired of the silence, Ruby turned to Irene before asking, "So, did you get invited too?" Irene, who felt so out of place, finally looked away from her food as she confusedly stared at Ruby. "Invited to what?" Impatiently tapping her figures on the table, Ruby pressed further. "Their main party thing or whatever." Putting down a glass of water, Irene's expression turned sullen as she responded. "Oh, that? I was invited at the start of the SCO dash." Bang, bang, bang. Flicking her head from her food to out the window, Liana immediately checked her pager and saw the emergency alarm going off. Using her exceptionally good sight, which she had been granted through one of her countless contracts with spirits, Liana peered towards the entrance of the clearing. Demons. Not 2 demons like the humans earlier had mentioned. Not 5. Not 10. Not 20. More than 20. 20 was just the max Liana could see with her eyes from this location. 2 demons could be taken care of quite easily, but 20 demons could destroy the entire clearing and the tree and the thousands of elves living inside without breaking a sweat. Not skipping a beat, she returned her gaze to the confused Albert and others before loudly announcing, "Lead the demons to the tree." A good ruler had to know how to choose between 2 bad options. Reveal the world trees inside or have thousands of civilians die from the demons, which would be roaming the streets in a matter of minutes. Now, she also had some trust in the humans due to the demons' attacks. The demons hadn't publicly made a move in hundreds of years, so calling this a coincidence would be far-fetched. The humans in front of her had somehow predicted their attack. Albert, who had never seen his mother in such a frantic state, immediately followed her orders, rushing out one of the windows. Lily and others, who were somewhat surprised at the attack, immediately regained their composure and flooded out of the mansion through the double doors. Jumping out the open window, Albert rushed towards the designated location for the elven reinforcements, his bow already in his hands and a quiver full of arrows on his back. Navigating through the city streets and jumping from object to avoid obstacles, Albert finally made his way to the highest points in the clearing, excluding the top of the World Tree. Heading up the hill, Albert felt the sense of relief as he saw over 500 archers lined up from the emergency alarm. Lifting his elegant white bow above his hand with his right hand, Albert stared down at his soldiers, who were either confused from the sudden alarm or nervous as they had realized this was not a drill. Silencing the cacophony of noises from his soldiers, Albert's voice rang out, even being heard from civilians in a nearby street. This is not a drill. For those who have not realized, this is not a drill. Raising his bow even higher, Albert grabbed an arrow from his quiver with his other hand and held it by his side. Looking down at his quivering soldiers, who had grasped the severity of the situation, Albert suppressed his unease and nervous emotions, maintaining an indifferent facade. The elven realm hadn't been attacked in hundreds of years. Sure, they had trained these soldiers and improved their weapon technology in that time, but they were still missing the most important thing: experience. This was these elven soldiers' first time facing a crisis. A crisis where the death of themselves, their fellows elves, and their families were on the line. No amount of training or technological advancement could have prepared them for this moment. The clash of emotions inside their brain, their natural instinct telling them to run away to survive, and their nerves and doubt. All those things would simply drag Albert's soldiers down. His troops needed to be at their peak strength. As a leader, his job was to quash those emotions, leaving only fighting and battle imprinted in their minds, allowing for the most optimal performance. The thing was, Albert was never a good liar. Albert knew nothing about what was going on. Never in his life had he seen his mother that distressed, and she had even mentioned the tree, a secret that was only supposed to be known by the elven rulers. The implications of those words and her mother's expression were apparent to Albert. An unfathomable danger was approaching them. Would the elven realm fall today? How many of his fellow elves would die today? Was this battle even winnable? Would he survive this battle? How could he stand there and tell his elves that they and all their families would survive and to focus on the battle when he couldn't even convince himself of that much? Was he even qualified to be their leader? The future ruler of the Elven Kingdom. Yet he could not even lead a single squadron of troops into battle. With his left hand raised, Albert placed an arrow in his upward-facing bow, carefully putting it against the bow's soft, elastic string. He was never a good liar, but he was an actor. Staring down at his troops, knowing damn well that there was a high chance that many of them could die today, Albert simply acted. Just as he had acted naive and kind to the human visitors, he could do the opposite. He acted as if he was oblivious to everything. His mother's odd behavior was pushed to the back of his mind. Who cared what danger was facing them? They were going to win this fight. It wasn't a thought or a question circulating in Albert's head. It was a concrete statement. Albert and the elves were going to kill whatever abominations were daring to attack their home and send them right to hell. One of them was dying today. Those abominations attacking them or Albert. As the emotions disappeared from Albert's head, leaving his pupils completely lifeless, he placed the arrow against the string before pulling the string back. With his hands on his bow, Albert turned his emotionless gaze to the shivering soldiers below him. I understand that you may all be worried, and there is a good reason for you to be worried. But worrying won't do anything. It will simply drag you down here. Focus on your weapons in front of you and win this battle. Responding to Albert's words, a single soldier spoke up from the crowd. What about our fam dash? Cutting him off mid-sentence, Albert locked his piercing gaze onto that soldier, speaking harshly. Win here to. If you care so much about saving whoever, then win. You all want to survive, right? Lose, and you, alongside all your family, die. It's simple. What more do I have to explain to you all? Turning away from the soldier, who was still trembling, Albert refocused his attention on the bow above him. Even if they won, there was no guarantee that his soldiers and their families would survive, but all Albert had to do was convince them that there was indeed a guarantee, giving them a false sense of hope. And Albert had just done that. Even if they didn't know it, Albert's words were imprinted in their minds. After all, Albert was their prince and future ruler. Just like it was instinct for them to run, it was instinct for them to believe the words of their superiors unconditionally. Releasing the string of the bow and sending the arrow flying straight up at the fastest speed he could, Albert continued. "Ready your bows?" Knocking another arrow in his bow, now facing the incoming demons, Albert didn't turn around, not bothering to see if his soldiers were running or staying behind. As his earlier arrow began its descent, flying straight down at speed completely invisible to the regular eye and even some awakened eyes, Albert waited until the descending arrow was right in front of his face before shooting his second arrow. As Albert's arrow collided with his earlier one, they both were propelled at speed invisible to a C rank and below side towards the entrance of the clearing. Shoot! As Albert's two arrows reached the entrance, perfectly hitting the first demon who dared to enter the clearing, a barrage of over 1,000 arrows flew over Albert's head, heading in the same direction. Many elves could shoot up to 3 arrows simultaneously with their constant training, so Albert wasn't surprised or happy upon seeing 1,000 arrows flying over his head. Instead, he was shaken. He could now see the entrance of the clearing perfectly, where countless demons were already flooding into the clearing. The 2 guards stood in front of those charging demons, running as fast as they could away, but it was still too slow. His emotions emerged again for a short moment, causing him to clench his fists. However, in the next second, they disappeared. The loss of 2 people was a small price to pay for victory. Either lose 2 people and win the fight, or lose millions by being defeated. Just as the first set of arrows hit the ground, an urgent voice rang out throughout the entire clearing. "Evacuate and find cover in your homes. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill." The elven evacuation drill had been set off, marking the start of their battle. Of course, Albert still remembered his mother's words throughout all of this. Lead them to the tree. Albert's plan was simple. Shoot all their arrows at the demons, forcing them to take cover at the world tree's trunk, where the branches were lower down and would block their arrows' trajectory. Watching the thousands of arrows fly above them like stars falling from the sky, Lily stopped for a second, staring up in awe. "Let's go." Interrupting Lily's stargazing, or arrow gazing, in this case, was Alya, as she forcefully grabbed Lily's shoulder, dragging her through the streets of elves and running around chaotically. Only a few steps behind them were Kevin and Liam, who paused the arguing momentarily upon seeing Alya's seriousness. Though, this didn't stop them from throwing small jabs at each other. "Yo, idiot, you almost tripped me." Liam sped up before responding to Kevin's comment. "Maybe if you watched where you were going, we wouldn't have this problem." "What the hell are you on about? You purposely walked in front of him." Ignoring Kevin's reply, Liam sped up even more, catching up with Lily and Alya in the front, and began discussing. Even though the Elven Queen had only given orders to Albert, Alya was determined to help, and of course, the rest of the main cast didn't dare refuse but insisted on helping. Even though the 4 of them had no idea about the enemy they were facing, they were still heading toward the attackers, saving and helping elves evacuate on their way. Seeing the burning desire and determination in Alya's eyes, Lily reminded her. "Alya, our job is to help save the elves. Albert and the Queen's job is to defend the attackers." Even though Lily knew they could take out 2 demons she thought were attacking, she didn't want to take any unnecessary risk and instead left the job to the strongest characters. Forced by Lily to nod her head, Alya and the rest of the main cast rushed even faster toward the entrance to the clearing. Far behind the main cast were the 2 invitees, Ruby and Irene, who were still following the main cast, albeit from a far distance. Awkwardly turning to Ruby, Irene hesitated for a moment before asking, "So what are we supposed to do?" Ruby, staring at a particular stand, snapped out of her daze before replying, "Whatever we want to do. It's not like we're children. We can do whatever we want." "Yeah." Leaving behind the dazed Irene, Ruby walked through the crowds of elves before stopping right in front of a stand. On the abandoned stand's table sat the Elven Realm's local specialty, a bunch of ice topped with various syrups in a cone-shaped cover. A snow cone. Picking up the snow cone, Ruby licked the top of the ice momentarily, savoring the refreshing ice and sweet cherry syrup, before heading back to Irene. Well, I'm gonna go help them. Are you going as well? Staring at the snow cone in Ruby's hand for a moment, Irene nodded, prompting Ruby to head toward the main cast with the snow cone still in her hand. Since the sun was entirely blocked out by the branches of leaves of the world tree, it didn't melt, so Ruby was able to enjoy the entire trip to the entrance of the clearing. Alya, who had rushed forward to help another elf, arrived at the main entrance before the rest of the main cast, immediately spotting the two elven guards running from the incoming demons near the entrance. Not skipping a beat or waiting for the rest of her friends to catch up with her, Alya pulled out her sword, summoned her wind-contracted spirits, and created an air current. Seeing Alya, the two guards screamed in unison, "Princess Alya, leave, it's too dangerous here." The two guards were on the verge of death, yet they stayed true to their duties and protected the princess to the very end. Alya, seeing this, only stretched the length of her wind current further, draining more mana and forcefully pulling the two guards toward her. However, when she increased the size of her wind current, Alya forgot one thing. The demons could also use the wind current. The first two demons, one heavily injured by Albert's arrow shots, emerged from the entrance and saw the opportunity, immediately catching the wind current behind the elven guards. Unable to cancel the wind current, Alya could only run and watch as the two massive demons flew towards her. The non-injured demon was to attack Alya as a gigantic orb of darkness appeared between his two horns before surging right at Alya. Swapping to her ice spirit, Alya created a massive ice shield to protect herself and the guards. However, the ice shield cracked under the pressure of the dark energy ball. Diving out of the way, Alya stared in horror as the energy ball charged right at the two elven guards, who were lying unconscious on the floor. An arrow that Alya barely managed to catch sight of appeared right above them before descending in a perfect spiral right at the non-injured demon. Then Liam, with his light blue sword, and Lily, with her water magic, appeared in front of the dark energy ball, stopping it completely. Using the opening, Ruby teleported right in front of one of the injured demons, creating 3 birds made of fire while Irene cast an inferno tornado. Coupled with the barrage of arrows raining in every second, that demon quickly disintegrated under the fire attacks, falling on the ground with countless burn marks. On the other hand, Liam and Kevin took care of the other injured demon as they attacked in sync, giving the demon no time to counterattack or dodge. Their attacks were timed perfectly, so the demon had no time to think. After a few seconds, the demon eventually fell under the barrage of attacks. Feeling a page on her communication device, Lily gestured for everyone to gather up before taking the device out of her pocket and displaying it. "Albert, to the world tree, the Queen and I have the rest of them there." In sync, the entire group voiced their thoughts. Rest of them? As their group glanced around, they didn't see any other demons apart from the 2 corpses lying on the ground. A/N, I believe I'm done with the extra chaps, so I'll go back to stockpiling for my next feature. Hearing a beep on the page, the group returned their gazes to the navigator, which displayed another message of Albert hurriedly urging them to come to the tree before hurriedly dispersing. "Which way is the world tree?" "Go." "Kevin, look up, you dumbass." Zack pulled out his swords and used a buff spell on the entire group to increase their speed, so Ruby, Irene, Lily, Kevin, Liam, Alya, and himself all sprinted toward the looming figure of the world tree. Throughout the streets, the elves, who still hurriedly rushed to their houses, stopped momentarily before blinking to confirm their eyes were working. The scene of 7 students, all clad in school uniforms, sprinting through the streets could be seen. One of them even had a snow cone. Why were they evacuating and forced to take cover while a bunch of little humans were free to roam the city? Sighing, the elves continued their trip back to their homes, albeit less stressful and slower, as they no longer assumed they were in dire danger. As Ruby followed behind Alya, who was leading their group, she carefully examined the expressions of each elves they passed on their way to the tree. Those were not the expressions of elves who had seen demons. Their expressions seemed more annoyed than scared and nervous. But how was that possible? For the demons to have reached the world tree, as Albert implied in his message, they must have crossed these same streets on their way there. There weren't even any signs of fight or damage. Everything looked the same as yesterday. Slowing down her pace, Ruby fell to the second last place or right in front of Irene. Running alongside Irene, Ruby was about to ask Irene about her suspicions when she saw Irene running ahead with an unusual smile. Curious at the change in attitude, Ruby turned to Irene mid-stride and asked, "Are you coming to help them fight even if there are more demons?" During the carriage ride and dinner, Ruby and Irene developed a sense of camaraderie as they were in similar situations regarding the main cast. Ruby just didn't want to join the main cast, but she was practically being forced to be. Lily bombarded her with invites and requests every second. On the other hand, Irene did want to join the main cast, just not this way. Sure, she had been invited months ago, but Irene knew it was a pity invite. It was clear that, unlike Alya, Liam, and Kevin, she had done nothing particularly special to prove herself. After the cruise ship incident, Lily asked if she would like to join their group without giving any tests or asking questions. Irene didn't even remember being useful at all during the cruise ship incident, whereas Liam was able to block the final attack, and the others were each able to at least contribute to the fight. It was clearly a pity invite, but was that so bad? At this point, Irene herself didn't know what she wanted. Life had been much simpler when she could simply force herself to cling to Kevin and follow him around. At least then, she had a purpose, even if it was a dog or something like that. But as she spent more and more time at this school, she discovered that she could no longer force herself to do things like that. Did she even want to join Lily's group anymore? Was that just another thing that she had forced herself to do? She had lost her sense of identity, grappling with the thoughts in her head, trying to discover which memories and thoughts were forced and natural. However, she could never find the answer, because it was right in front of her all this time. Even if the thoughts were forced, there were still her thoughts. Whose head were those forced thoughts in? Irene's, and nothing in the world could ever change that. Whether forced or not, those thoughts belonged to only Irene. Thus, they were part of her, a foundation on which her personality and behavior were built. So, why did it matter if the thoughts were forced or not? Irene's thoughts were still there at the end of the day. After this realization, Irene was finally able to realize what she wanted. Using both her forced and natural thoughts, Irene concluded that she didn't want anything. Why did she have to want something? Why did she have to have a goal that she needed to complete? Why did she have some overarching goal that made all her decisions? Why couldn't she live in the present instead of worrying about the future? Live moment by moment and make decisions based on what you want, not on how they will affect the success rate of your goal. And at this very moment, Irene wanted to kill some demons and save some elves. Was there some moral obligation that forced Irene to decide that? Was there some peer pressure from the main cast? Nope. It was just what Irene wanted to do. Decisions didn't need to have reasons behind them. Why did she have to prove herself and defend her decision against anyone? At the end of the day, who cares? It's her life and her decisions. Turning to Ruby, Irene shrugged her shoulders, a small grin appearing, and replied, "I guess I am." Seeing the unusually motivated Irene, Ruby dropped all thoughts of revealing her suspicions out of fear that it would dampen Irene's attitude. Friends, they were a weird thing for Ruby, but she was certain of one thing about friendship. She didn't want to lose it. The time she had spent chatting to Irene in the corner of the carriage while the rest of the main cast were off discussing antics about saving the world. The time she had spent playing hide and seek with Irene yesterday when the main cast was off talking to the Elven Queen, and countless other memories surfaced in Ruby's head. It brought a sense of serenity and peace to her always stressed and chaotic mind. A peace that she didn't want to lose. Replying to Irene, who had suddenly sped up, Ruby said, "Well, someone looks joyful today." After saying that, Ruby used her teleportations to move past the rest of the main cast and catch up to Alya at the front. The odds of the pagers being stolen or hacked are 0, so if Ruby's suspicion is true, Albert or the Queen must be defeated. Or a betrayal, but Ruby highly doubted that. But then there was the fact that Ruby was a traitor herself. An evil villain boss turned good is now invited to a group of crazy students who are determined to save the world from any danger. Sighing and scratching her head, pondering how this all started in the first place, Ruby turned to Alya and asked, "Say, Princess, how strong are the prince and queen?" Looking straight ahead at the looming tree, Alya replied, One single arrow from the prince could destroy a B-rank beast and my mother. I don't even know. Since Ruby was already a part of their group in Alya's eyes, she had no qualms about sharing such important information. However, that didn't stop her from being curious. And why do you ask? My curiosity got the best of me. Heard the saying, curiosity kills the cat? Putting her hands on her head to form cat ears, Ruby replied. And do I look like a cat to you? Letting a slight laugh, Alya regained her composure before saying to herself, if only we had cats back at the academy, but of course, they have to be banned. What did you say? Interrupting their conversations, the trunk of the world tree came into sight, looking the same as it did yesterday, except for one thing. Albert was slumped against the tree, drenched in sweat, his bow and quiver resting next to him. Running past Ruby, Alya sped up for the next minute until she finally reached the exhausted Albert. Grabbing his hand and pulling him up, Alya asked, where did you all your troops go? Scratching the top of his head, Albert gave a smirk, which was clearly forced, and replied, I guess our mother is a better person than me. Here, I thought I was being a perfect ruler by lying to the soldiers earlier. Recalling the memory of his mother, Liana, frantically sending all the elven reinforcements away and telling them to evacuate with the citizens, Albert almost fell back onto the ground. He wasn't a true leader, he was a fraud, once again. Leaders didn't need to be emotionless and cold-hearted. Well, they could be. There was only a requirement that a ruler needed to fulfill, and somehow Albert failed in that. Care about your subjects' lives. What an actor he was. After waiting for the rest of the group to catch up to Alya and him, Albert pointed at the world tree, and in the most serious tone he could muster, he said, in there is where we have to go. Seeing the group's confused expressions, Albert didn't even bother to explain but moved on to the next topic. Well, I'm sure you're wondering where all the demons are, huh? Well, they're in that tree as well. Breaking the silence, Kevin's annoying voice sounded once again. So you're telling me that we're going inside a tree that is filled with demons? Seeing Albert nod his head at his question, Kevin was just about to ask another question when Liam suddenly slapped him on the back. Oh, what the hell, man? Sighing, Liam said to Kevin. Oh, come on, man, you do this every time. You complain about how hard the task is and how we're all going to die, and we're all stupid for doing this, but then you end up doing it anyway. Let's just skip the complaining part, all right? With a serious expression that did not fit his face in the slightest, Kevin turned to Liam and placed his hand on Liam's right shoulder. I'm about to risk my life to do this shit, and you're saying I can't even complain about it? The whole group went silent. For once, Kevin might be right. Shouldn't he be at least allowed to complain a bit? Opening his mouth in triumph and complaints already on the tip of his tongue, Kevin was about to speak when Albert, completely oblivious to Kevin's attitude, interrupted him. All right, let's move on. I'm taking you to the world tree, and the 8 of us have one job, get to it and save it. Lily, who was also suspicious of the whole situation as she had come to the same realization as Ruby after seeing no elven civilians scared in the slightest, asked. Then, what about the demons? Patting Alya on the shoulder, Albert replied. That's our mother's job. Following Albert's lead, the 8 of them placed their hands on the rough and unpolished bark of the world tree. Not explaining anything else, the group was about to enter the world tree under Albert's guidance when they heard a sudden sound. NWWWW. Since the sound came from the other side of the massive trunk, they could not see the source, and with their hands already on the world tree, it was too late to back out and find it. Was that a Sidash? As their surroundings distorted, and the 8 of them appeared inside the world tree, in a completely different place than Ren, another sound caught them off guard. Bang, bang. As the sound of gunshots and cannonball shots echoed throughout the trees inside, the 8 of them, even Albert, stepped back and instinctively covered their ears. Busy. Blinding their eyes, a sudden flash of bright purple appeared before dispersing right before them. In front of them stood a lady dressed in all black, with 2 revolvers in each hand and a lighting purple current surrounding her entire body, making her look like some sort of mythical figure. Breaking the silence first was Alya as she rushed towards the figure with no weapons in her hands. Mom! Taking Alya into her embrace, Liana tilted her head upwards and stared at the rest of the group before asking. Let's save the thanks for later. Trust me, you 8 will be rewarded and revered at the very least. Bang. Releasing Alya from her embrace, Liana tilted her 2 revolves up at the roof before asking. Best of luck to you all. My appreciation cannot be expressed in words, but may the world tree guide your path. Get back here alive, all of you. Or trust me, you'll regret it. Busy. Just like that, Liana was gone before the students could even blink. Leaving behind only a single spark of purple for the students, a streak of lightning could be seen deeper into the tree, following Liana's back as she dashed back toward the dozens of demons.